Book 3, The Whirlwind. Chapter 1, Worries.
Don't be a-frettin'. You're making this fearsome. It's probably good news, and he wants us to hear some.
Aristophanes' poetry was just as bad as ever, but Lysistrata and Samson barely noticed their friend's awful rhymes. Instead, they were busy wondering why the weaver had summoned them down to the halls of tapestry, and why he had called them in the middle of the night.
Doubt it, do I?
Lysistrata shook his head over Aristophanes' poem.
At night this time of, Weaver calls us not for good news.
Samson, the half-dragonfly, half-ladybug, agreed in his usual high-pitched chatter. Aristophanes took a deep breath and sighed. In his heart, the roly-poly creature knew better, too. Whatever news the weaver had to share would not be good. Their footsteps echoed as they entered another huge hall. In many ways, each hall was like a giant museum. But instead of boring paintings or half-naked statues, these halls held tapestries. Tapestries that shimmered and sparkled with threads of light. Brilliant, breathtaking light. Light that came from the center. Light that came from Imager. Creatures from every dimension came here to admire Imager's handiwork. Because each of these tapestries, each of these masterpieces, was actually an individual's life. That's right. Every joy, every heartache, every success, and every failure of a person's existence could be found in his or her own tapestry of awesome, glowing threads. Threads that were woven with infinite care to Imager's precise designs by none other than the Weaver. The three Phaeronians rounded the corner and spotted the old man at the far end of the hall. He was peering into a magnifying glass, carefully studying one of the three tapestries that hung before him.
"It's good of you to come, yes it is,"
he spoke without looking up. The trio said nothing as they approached. They were too busy staring at the tapestries before him, too busy trying to recognize them.
"Do you know them?"
He still did not look up. Aristophanes took a guess.
There are 3 little buddies from the Upside-Down Kingdom who are starting to taste and see Imager's dominion.
The weaver cringed. He had obviously forgotten about Aristophanes' poetry.
"Your friends will be tasting and seeing a lot more of Imager than you think, yes they will. According to these threads here."
He lowered his magnifying glass. He pointed to a dazzling pattern of light in each of the 3 tapestries, a pattern so brilliant that it hurt your eyes to look at.
"According to these threads, all 3 children will have an opportunity to be rebreathed."
Aristophanes, Lysistrata, and Samson exchanged looks. Well, this was wonderful news. To be rebreathed by Imager was an Upside-Downer's greatest honor. The weaver wasn't finished.
"But the evil Bobok and the illusionist also know the special weave of these tapestries, and they'll do anything in their power to destroy the children before they step into the whirlwind, before they're rebreathed."
Then help them, must we?
Lysistrata reached into his pocket for his trusty cross-dimensionalizer.
At once will there go and—
"No!"
The weaver cut him off.
"To be rebreathed is something the children must choose on their own, yes it is. It must be of their own free will."
But if Bobok and the illusionist are gonna—
"Their plan is most evil. If you interfere before the correct time, you will not only destroy the children, you will destroy yourselves."
The statement surprised everyone. Finally, Lysistrata spoke.
But friends of ours are they. Help should we?
"That is why I summoned you here. You may watch their tapestries. You may even examine their threads. But until I give permission, you must not, you will not interfere."
All 3 protested loudly until the old man raised his hands. It was a simple gesture, but one that commanded silence. After all, he was the weaver. His voice grew softer.
"I know this will be painful for you, yes I do. but they have much to learn. You must trust me on this. You must trust Imager. If you interfere before their time, you will destroy everything."
The three Faeronians looked to one another. What could they say? When he was right, he was right. And one thing about the Weaver, he was always right. Back home, back in the Upside-Down Kingdom, Nathan and Denise arrived outside Grandpa's second-hand shop. The little bell above the door gave a jingle as they opened it and stepped inside. Grandpa smiled as they entered.
And a good afternoon to the both of you.
Hey, Grandpa. Hi.
Listen, would you be doing me a favor? Would you be looking after the shop a few minutes while I'm away?
Sure. Where you headed?
I've got to be making a delivery over at the Burtons. You sure you won't be minding?
No problem.
The old man grinned and tousled the boy's red hair as he headed for the door. Nathan grinned back. So did Denise. Now, 9 months ago, it would have been like pulling teeth to get Nathan to do anything for anybody. But that was 9 months ago, before the Bloodstone, before their trips to Faerû and its accompanying kingdoms. Now, things were changing. Not all at once, mind you, but a little bit, day by day. Grandpa had barely left before Joshua, Nathan's older brother, stormed into the shop. Josh was everybody's friend, super smart, super athletic, and most of all, super popular. He worked hard at these things, especially the popularity part, and that's what bugged Denise the most. Because although they'd been friends since childhood, she was everything Josh was not. Instead of super smart, super athletic, or super popular, she was just Denise Wolfe, the all-school oddball.
Stupid.
Josh dumped his books onto the counter. He ripped the campaign button off his shirt and flung it across the store.
It's not fair.
Denise and Nathan traded looks. Anger and temper tantrums were their specialties, not Josh's. As the oldest of the three, he was always the more mature, so what was he doing acting like them?
Why should I lose that stupid election? Just because I'm honest? It's not fair.
Denise knew she shouldn't try to reason with him, not when he was like this. Unfortunately, she never liked to let a good argument slip by.
Maybe if you'd have promised good times and no homework like that other guy, maybe you'd have won.
But he was lying. He can't deliver those promises.
He can't?
It was Denise's turn to feel depressed. Well, now that she was in middle school, there was a lot more homework than before. Josh shook his head.
As student body president, do you think he can really replace algebra with video games?
I was just hoping he'd drop science.
Josh gave her a look. Science was his favorite subject, and she knew it. Denise shrugged and hopped onto the stool behind the counter.
Life's not fair. You guys know how hard I campaigned, how hard we all campaigned.
Denise did know. The past few weeks, she'd done all she could do to help him win. She made posters, she passed out campaign buttons, she threatened to beat up kids who wouldn't wear those campaign buttons. You see, Denise has a little problem with her temper. But there was that other issue bothering her, and she figured now was as good a time as any to bring it up.
If you ask me, you're way too competitive and concerned with popularity anyways.
Josh turned on her.
There's nothing wrong with trying to be the best.
Sure, but you make it like a lifetime career.
What am I supposed to do? Not try? Not care what anybody thinks? Like some losers I know?
Denise turned to him, her mouth dropping open. Being mean wasn't like Josh at all. Seeing the look on her face, he immediately softened.
Hey, I wasn't talking about you.
She glanced away. That's another reason that they were such good friends. Because even when he was in pain like now, he was always kind to her. She gave another shrug.
Maybe I am a loser, and maybe life isn't fair.
Then turning back at him, she added,
But you're way too wrapped up in having to win.
Josh started to answer but couldn't. She had him, and he knew it. Nathan limped back from the pop machine.
I don't know about any of that, but you're right about one thing. Life isn't fair.
He tossed them both a can of pop. Denise caught hers and nodded. If anyone knew about life being unfair, it was Nathan. Ever since she could remember, he had had that limp, that pain in his hip that no operation could cure. Oh, sure, during their last visit to Feyre, the Weaver had promised that it would make him a better person, but that didn't exactly make things for him any easier, or more fair. She opened her can and immediately slurped the foam that bubbled up over the top.
He's right, you know.
Josh popped his own can.
I mean, with everything we've learned about Imager, that's the one thing I still can't buy.
What's that?
Denise fought back a belch. She'd noticed her world-famous belches weren't as popular with Josh as they used to be.
I mean, we all know about his love and stuff, what a good guy he is and everything, but I don't know.
Don't know what?
It just seems that if Imager is so good, why doesn't he make life more fair?
Denise looked on, waiting for more.
Why does he let unfair things happen, instead of giving us what we really deserve?
A brief silence settled over the group. It was true, Denise and the guys had learned lots about Imager from their past journeys, but it was also true that life really wasn't fair. Why? If Imager was in charge, why wasn't there more justice in the world? Why didn't people get what they deserved?
I suppose if we really want to find out, there is a way.
Think we're ready for another trip?
Denise glanced out the window.
Not tonight. There won't be a full moon for a few more days.
Besides, the bloodstone's at home in my room. I'm still running tests on it.
Maybe when you're done?
Sounds good to me.
Josh nodded.
Me too. Should be about a week or so.
But it would be sooner than that. For in the darkest threads of each of their tapestries, the faint sound of hoofbeats could be heard. Hoofbeats that grew louder by the second. Hoofbeats that would soon enter the Upside-Down Kingdom. The truth of the matter is, the illusionist had not enjoyed turning herself into a horse. She took even less pleasure in the evil Bobok riding atop her back. But what's the most sinister queen in 23 dimensions to do? Take a shortcut through the center? Travel right through Imager's home? No, of course not. She had her pride. Besides, there was the minor detail of being vaporized if she got too close to Imager's presence. Not a bad ending for the creature up there on her back, but an ending she'd prefer to avoid. No, the best course was the one they had chosen, to take the long way around, to travel from dimension to dimension, slowly making their way toward their target, toward Imager's beloved Upside-Down Kingdom. The illusionist panted as she turned her head to speak to the ice-blue orb on her back.
Dear heart?
For 3,000 epochs, these two creatures had fought over the disputed border between their kingdoms, back when they had kingdoms, back before the Upside-Downers had destroyed them. And for 3,000 epochs, the two had hated each other almost as much as they hated Imager. Almost, but not quite.
No talking, my lady. Save your energy so we may travel faster. We haven't much time.
The illusionist bore down harder. Her legs and hoofs ached from the effort. Now, it was obvious Bobok loved his present position of power over her. But that was okay. The tables would soon be turned. After all, she could transform herself into any being she wished, while Bobok would always remain Bobok. When they arrived at the Upside-Down Kingdom, he would have to wear the disguise she had prepared for him, and that would bring her pleasure, immense pleasure. Again she turned her head.
How much longer, dear heart? You have the maps. How much longer before we arrive?
Soon. Very, very soon.
Chapter 2. Deception.
The Bunsen burner Josh borrowed from school had been roaring away for 20 minutes in his bedroom. And still the bloodstone did not melt. Stranger still, it wasn't even hot. The metal ring it rested on glowed bright red with heat, but the stone wasn't even warm. In fact, it still felt cool to the touch. Amazing. No matter how many experiments Josh ran on it, the bloodstone never changed. It remained exactly the same. The past few hours had been good for Josh. Because of his love for science, the experiments had completely taken his mind off losing the election. In fact, he felt more relaxed now than he had in weeks. That is until he heard the hoofbeats behind him. There's something about hoofbeats in your bedroom in the middle of the night that can set a person on edge. Josh leaped from his chair and spun around, but before he completed his turn, the hoofbeats had changed to footsteps, and instead of a horse, there stood before him a type of coach, but a very beautiful coach, complete with sweats, tied-back hair, and, of course, the ever-popular stopwatch and whistle. She held a leash in her hand that was attached to a living ice ball on a choke chain. The creature appeared to be some sort of pet, and not a very happy one. It took more than a moment for Josh to find his voice.
Who are you? Where did you come from?
Why, from Farah, of course.
The coach grinned.
But we didn't signal you.
Josh threw a quick glance back to the stone.
The only way to signal you is by putting the bloodstone in the light of a full moon. And it's not a full moon, so how could...
Dear heart, didn't they tell you?
Tell me what?
She gave the bloodstone an uneasy glance. For a crude device, it seemed to make her a bit nervous. Josh frowned.
What about Aristophanes? What about Lystro Q and Samson?
They have served their purposes well and send their best.
You've talked to them?
Of course. But Imager has now placed you in my care. That is, if you count me worthy of such an honor.
She gave a slight bow and waited. Josh was still somewhat suspicious.
What is your name?
Oh, gracious. My name is of little importance when compared to your...
Just so I know. I mean, if I want to call you something, what would I call you?
Well...
She thought for a moment.
If you must call me something, I suppose Your Highness is appropriate.
Her ice pet coughed slightly. Josh was surprised.
You are a queen?
Of course. Only royalty is fit to train royalty.
Royalty? Who else around here is royalty?
Why, you are. I've been sent here to train you.
Again her pet coughed. Apparently his master was holding his choke chain a bit too tight. Josh looked down at the creature, his frown deepening.
And your little friend there? No offense, but he kind of looks like the thing Nathan described, the one who kidnapped him to Keygarp.
Oh, you mean Fido here?
She stooped down and patted the creature on the head.
Good Fido. Good boy.
Yeah, Fido.
Well, he is from Keygarp, I'll grant you that. But I've trained this little fellow since he was a pup.
She reached into her sweatpants and produced a doggy biscuit. It took only a moment for the smell to reach Joshua. It was so awful it made his eyes water.
And you wouldn't hurt a fly, would you, Fido?
She reached down and held the biscuit to the creature's mouth. Fido did not look thrilled about taking it until the coach firmly repeated herself while yanking on the choke chain.
Would you, Fido?
Half choking, Fido opened his mouth and she popped the biscuit inside.
Now chew, boy. Chew up the nummy treat for Mama till it's all gone.
Reluctantly, unhappily, the animal began to chew. Joshua watched, guessing it tasted even worse than it smelled.
Now.
The coach looked up, turning her smile upon him.
Where were we?
You said something about me being royalty.
Yes.
You've made some sort of mistake. I'm just me.
Oh, no, dear heart. You are indeed royalty. You are one of the elect, one of the chosen.
Josh felt a stirring inside his chest, the same sort of stirring he felt whenever he was praised or had won at something. The coach moved closer, lowering her voice.
I guarantee you, my friend, after my training, you will never lose another election again.
Josh looked at her in surprise.
How'd you know about the election?
Dear heart, I have studied every thread of your tapestry.
Josh nodded. The fact that she'd seen his tapestry gave him more assurance. Perhaps she really could be trusted. She continued, taking another step closer, her words growing more and more persuasive.
I've been sent to train and prepare you.
His heart pounded a little in excitement.
For what?
Under my guidance, you will become more popular than you have ever dreamed possible. In fact,
She lowered her voice to a mere whisper.
if you allow me, I will make you as popular as Imager himself.
Yeah, right.
As you wish. Perhaps I have overestimated your ambition.
Josh shifted uncomfortably. His mind raced, his heart beat faster.
How could anybody become as popular as Imager?
By becoming perfect.
Her second statement was even more shocking than the first.
You could do that?
Josh's voice cracked slightly.
You could actually make somebody perfect?
It's the only way. If you're going to be as popular as Imager, you must become as perfect as Imager.
But how?
Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. It sounds like it's too much work for you.
She turned to her pet.
Wouldn't you agree, Fido?
The creature rolled back and forth as if nodding.
I'm not afraid of work.
Perhaps.
The coach looked him over carefully.
But for you to become perfect, I'm afraid it would mean a great deal of work, particularly on this body of yours, and of course on your personality.
I said I'm not afraid of work.
The coach only smiled.
How would you... I mean, what...
He caught himself and tried to sound less eager.
If somebody were interested in being perfect, what exactly would they have to do?
Why, dear heart, that's what the kingdom of perfection is all about.
Kingdom of perfection?
Of course. It's divided into 3 levels. On the first level, you work toward physical perfection. On the second, you obtain perfect popularity.
And on the third?
Josh could no longer hide the eagerness in his voice.
The third level is the Sea of Justice, a place where only the perfect may enter. There, at last, you would enjoy the rewards of all your hard work. There, you would finally receive all you deserve.
By now, Josh's head reeled. Everything was moving too fast. He knew he should slow down, but he couldn't. After all, the coach was promising popularity equal to Imager himself.
So, how would we start? I mean, if I were interested.
You would simply give me permission to transport you.
To the kingdom of perfection?
That is correct.
That's it?
The coach nodded.
But what about Nathan? What about Denny?
I'm afraid neither one of them is much interested in perfection. Wouldn't you agree?
She gave him a knowing smile. Though he tried not to, he had to smile back. Silence filled the room. It was clear she was waiting for his decision. He was cautious, of course, but if he let this type of opportunity pass, how could he live with himself? Yes, it was a risk. He barely knew her, but look at what she was promising. Popularity equaled Imager. She continued waiting. So did her pet. Finally, after taking a deep breath, Josh spoke.
Well, what are we waiting for?
The coach smiled.
Not a thing, dear heart. Not a thing.
Joshua turned back to the desk.
Just let me grab the bloodstone here and...
No, don't!
Joshua turned to see the coach stumbling over her pet, who was rolling behind her as if for protection.
What?
With effort, her smile returned.
As I said, you have graduated beyond the stone.
We don't need it?
The coach shook her head.
It is now time to rely on your own powers. The stone was needed in the beginning, but now it is a crutch that could slow your growth. You must put it out of sight. In fact, it would be best if you completely removed it.
Remove it?
Yes, I will explain on our journey. But for now, it would be best to place it outside your dwelling.
Outside?
That is correct.
Joshua looked down at Fido, who rolled back and forth, nodding. It was an odd request, there was no doubt about it, but she seemed pretty serious. So did Fido.
Well, I guess I could put it out on the windowsill or something.
That is an excellent idea. Most excellent indeed.
Still a little puzzled, Joshua moved toward the window.
This seems kind of stupid, but if you really think it's better...
He arrived at the window, threw it open, and with a sigh, set the bloodstone on the ledge.
There.
He shut the window and started to turn back.
So, what exactly is it that...
But he never finished his question. He was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, then an overwhelming numbness, then nothing at all. Denise bolted up in bed. At first she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard it again, a rattling, a clattering. She fumbled for her bedstand light and turned it on. As usual, it was about 100 times too bright, at least for this time of the morning. She squinted at the clock. It read 4:23 a.m. The rattling grew louder. She searched the room. Nothing unusual, just the everyday disaster of dirty socks, dirty clothes, scattered papers, coat piles, book piles, shoe piles, and a few baseball pennants tacked to the wall. Oh, and of course, the doll. Some may have thought Denise was getting too old for dolls, but she didn't much care what they thought. The doll was the last present she ever received from her father. He gave it to her when she was 4 years old, the day he left, and she would never part with it. At last she spotted something. In the corner by the door, behind the broken bicycle pump and football helmet, right next to the spilled box of Josh's campaign buttons. It was the canteen, the one that still held water from their visits to Feyraw, the water made up of liquid words and letters from the stream. It was shaking and vibrating on the floor. Denise threw off the covers and cautiously padded over to it. At first she was afraid to touch it. But that was silly. The water inside had always helped them before. It had helped them see and hear right side up. It had even saved Nathan from the illusionist. So, what was she afraid of? Plenty. When was the last time anyone saw a canteen bouncing around on a floor? But Denise wasn't about to let a little ice-cold fear get in her way. Not her. So, with a deep breath and a little shiver, she finally stooped down and picked up the canteen.
Ouch!
She dropped it back to the floor. It was so hot it almost burned her. Almost, but not quite. She reached for the bottom of her sweatshirt, the one she slept in, and carefully wrapped it around the canteen. Carefully, she picked it up. It continued to vibrate in her hands, but it was more than vibrating. It felt as if it was boiling, as if the water inside the canteen was boiling. She started to unscrew the cap and burned her fingers for good this time. Then she tried again, wrapping her sweatshirt around the cap first. Slowly, she began to open it. There was a loud hiss, and before she knew it, a small cloud of steam escaped. But this was no ordinary steam. Like the water inside, this steam was made up of letters and words. The cloud continued to grow until it was 2, maybe 3 feet across. As it grew, Denise stepped back. It wasn't that she was frightened, it's just, she was a little frightened. She was a lot frightened, but not over the cloud. It was over what was happening to the cloud. It hovered at eye level just a few feet from her. As it cooled, it started to turn dark. And as it turned dark, mist started to fall from it, followed by rain. That's right. Actual drops of rain fell from the cloud. It lasted nearly a minute until the entire cloud had turned to rain and fallen to the floor. Now it lay in a little pool next to the box of Joshua's campaign buttons. Denise stared in amazement. Nothing more happened. Nothing at all. Cautiously she walked to the puddle on the floor. She stooped down to examine it. The letters and words had all disappeared. Now it looked like any other puddle of water. She carefully reached out, then touched it with a finger. It felt exactly like water. She scowled. With all of the special effects, she had expected to end up with something more than a puddle of water on the floor. But that was it. The canteen had quit boiling, the cloud had disappeared. Now there was just a puddle of water. Annoyed, Denise rose to her feet. Then, just before she turned, she saw it. A reflection. One of Josh's campaign buttons, the one pinned to the edge of the box, was reflecting in the water. But the water didn't reflect the photo of the smiling Joshua. It didn't even reflect the catchy slogan, "Vote for Josh, by gosh." Instead, it reflected a very sick-looking Josh. A Josh who seemed to be stretched out on some sort of bed or cot. His eyes were shut and he looked very, very pale. In fact, he almost looked— Denise sucked in her breath. He almost looked dead. She dropped to her knees for a better view, but momentarily lost the reflection. When she moved and found it again, it had changed. Now it was just the reflection of the campaign button, stupid slogan and all. The sick Josh, the dying Josh, had completely disappeared. Denise knelt there another moment. Then she sprang into action. She wasn't sure what she'd seen, but it felt like a warning, some sort of omen. Quickly she threw on her clothes and slipped into her shoes. Joshua was in some sort of trouble. He needed help. She grabbed her coat and raced out of the door. A moment later she returned to the room, scooped up the canteen, and was gone for good.
Chapter 3. A Close Encounter.
You're crazy.
Nathan opened the back kitchen door to let Denise inside.
It's 5:30 in the morning. Everyone's still in.
I just need to...
Denise gulped for air. Running halfway across town will do that to a person.
I just need to see Josh for a second.
Suit yourself.
Nathan rubbed his eyes and stepped aside to let her pass.
You always do.
Denise knew she could fire off a good comeback if she wanted. Firing off comebacks was one of her specialties. But right now there were more important things to do. She had tried waking Josh by tossing pebbles up to his window. Although she could see a strange flickering light inside, he did not answer. Nathan was her second choice. They reached the steps and took them as quickly and silently as possible without waking the grown-ups. When they arrived at the top, they turned toward Joshua's bedroom. The door was shut, but the same flickering light could be seen underneath.
That's funny. He never gets up this early.
And what's with that light?
Nathan tried to shrug like it was no big deal, but Denise could see he was uneasy. As they approached the room, she noticed a soft, whispering whir. She slowed.
What's that sound?
Nathan strained to listen, but instead of answering, he simply frowned. They continued down the hall, slower, more cautiously. They were nearly there when Nathan started to chuckle.
What? It's the burner thing he uses. He's just doing an experiment with it, that's all.
Denise took a deep breath and blew out the tension.
Honestly, sometimes you're such a girl.
Normally these were fighting words, and normally Denise would make him eat them. But considering his parents were sleeping just down the hall, she refrained from inflicting major bodily damage. They arrived at the door and Nathan reached up to quietly knock. There was no response. He tried again. Still nothing. Denise stepped closer and whispered through the crack.
Josh, it's Denny. You okay?
More in the nothing department. Nathan turned the knob and pushed open the door.
Josh?
But there was no sign of him anywhere. Just the eerie glow of the Bunsen burner as it flickered light and shadows across the room. Denise and Nathan entered.
Josh?
No answer, only the quiet roar of the burner.
I don't like this. Something's wrong.
Now who's being chicken?
I'm not kidding. Where would he go this time of morning? And why didn't he shut off the burner?
Denise looked around the room. It wasn't much, just the usual bed, the usual dresser with the usual chair and the usual clothes thrown on it. Only the desk was unusual. It was covered with glass beakers, test tubes, and all sorts of computer junk. Yes, sir, Josh loved his science.
Maybe he went for a walk or something.
Nathan didn't answer but moved toward the desk. Denise gave another glance around, then spotted something. Across the room, she saw the closet door was half open. Well, nothing unusual about that, but inside she caught a glimpse of moving shadows. Maybe it was from the flickering burner. Maybe it was just her nerves playing tricks on her. Maybe. Unfortunately, there was only one way to find out. Carefully, cautiously, she started toward the closet. She heard nothing, unless you counted the pounding of her heart in her ears. And the closer she got, the louder that pounding grew. Now she stood directly in front of the closet. She hated this, but somebody had to do it. She reached out, grabbed the door, and threw it open to see nothing. Nothing but clothes.
Denny,
Nathan stood over at Joshua's desk looking at an open notebook.
listen to this. It's his journal.
He began to read.
Friday, 10:05 p.m.
That was last night.
He nodded and continued.
Have subjected the bloodstone to 20 minutes of intense heat. Still no change. I am beginning to strongly suspect...
He came to a stop.
Go ahead. Strongly suspect what?
That's all. It stops right there, right in the middle of the sentence.
Denise did her best to fight off a little shiver.
That's weird.
For once in her life, Denise didn't argue. She reached over and began rummaging through the different piles on the desk.
What are you doing?
Looking for the bloodstone. If he was busy running experiments on it, shouldn't it be around?
Denny, look!
She glanced over to see Nathan staring down at the floor. Slowly he kneeled and picked up something. Then, even more slowly, he rose with it in his hand.
What is it? Looks like a little shaving of ice or something.
Nathan nodded.
And it feels like ice. It's cold and slippery.
He pushed the sliver around in his palm, squeezing it and pressing it.
But it doesn't melt.
He squeezed it harder.
I can't get this stupid thing to melt.
Denise looked up to him. A strange fear had crept over his face.
Nathan?
He gave no answer.
Nathan?
When he finally spoke, his voice trembled.
Denny, it's blue.
So?
So what do we know that's icy and blue and doesn't melt?
She frowned, not understanding.
Who do we know that's icy and blue and doesn't melt?
It was Denise's turn to give a little shudder.
Bobak! You think Bobak was here?
Nathan looked up. He tried to swallow, but there appeared to be nothing in his mouth to swallow. He was frightened, and Denise knew why. Bobak was the evil ice ball who had lured him into Keegarp. Bobak was the one who had held him prisoner in the horrible menagerie. Bobak was the one who had nearly destroyed them at the portal, and now that very same Bobak had been in this very same room just a few hours earlier. Nathan had every reason to be terrified. But Denise handled fear differently. When she got frightened, she got angry. And when she got angry, she paced.
Why?
She started walking back and forth across the room.
Why would he come here? And what about Josh? You think he took Josh?
Nathan gave no answer.
And the bloodstone? Where's the bloodstone?
She passed the window. Outside, the clouds were starting to turn pink with the first signs of dawn. She moved closer for a better look. It was then she noticed the canteen strapped to her belt. It was starting to bubble again.
We gotta do something!
Nathan blurted. Denise turned, startled at the outburst.
Josh has been stolen by Bobak. We've gotta help him.
But how? Without the bloodstone, we can't signal Fey Ra. We can't do anything.
That's my brother.
I know.
She motioned him to lower his voice so he wouldn't wake the house.
But what can we do? Without the bloodstone, there's no way we can... Unless...
An idea began to form.
Unless what?
Do you remember when we first got the bloodstone?
Sure, for my birthday. You gave it to me for my...
No, before that. Remember I told you I found it up in my uncle's attic? In that old trunk of his?
Yeah, so?
So, maybe there's more of it.
More bloodstone?
Doubt filled Nathan's voice.
Yeah, or maybe something else. I mean, my uncle collected a lot of crazy stuff, right?
Denny, going through your uncle's trunk isn't gonna get Josh back.
All right, then. What do you suggest?
Nathan looked at her. She looked at Nathan. Finally, without a word, he turned and headed for the door.
Where are you going?
To get out of these pajamas so we can go to your uncle's.
I'll wait for you downstairs.
She moved to the desk and turned off the burner. Then she headed out into the hall. It was only then that she remembered the canteen and reached down to feel it again. But the boiling had stopped. How odd. When she was in the room, close to the window, it was boiling like crazy. And now as she headed down the hall, it felt completely normal. How odd. How very odd.
Faster, dearest of ladies, faster.
Though her lungs cried for air, the illusionist galloped harder. It was one thing to carry Bobak from kingdom to kingdom, but to drag the unconscious upside-downer on the litter behind them, well, she was definitely feeling the strain. Then there was their current direction. At the moment they were traveling through Burak, the kingdom of rock. And the rock wasn't just the land portion, it was every portion. Everything in Burak was rock. The land, the sea, even the air. Of course, moving through such a kingdom can be a little tricky. Breathing it in isn't so easy either. Fortunately, the molecules in this dimension were billions of times larger, so the illusionist could easily navigate between them, leaping from one molecule to another. Still, it was no picnic.
Are you certain we are traveling in the correct direction? I don't recall the kingdom of perfection being this way.
My dearest friend, you doubt my navigation skills?
Of course not. I only hope this lengthy voyage has nothing to do with my little joke of feeding you the doggy biscuit.
Gentle lady, I'm far above that sort of thing.
Of course you are.
The illusionist agreed, but knew full well he wasn't. Then, changing the subject, she asked,
How is the boy?
Bobak looked over his shoulder to the cot dragging behind them. In the bedroom, they had pressed the right combination of nerves on the boy's neck to put him to sleep. But he would not sleep forever.
Hurry, esteemed one. We must arrive at perfection before he wakes.
I have little remaining strength, and my hoofs are splitting from the sharp edges of the rock.
Then dwell on the beauty of our trap. Dream of the pain we will inflict upon Imager. Dream of breaking his heart. Dream whatever you must, but hurry! Hurry!
Chapter 4. Greetings from an Old Friend.
Nathan was so concerned about his brother that he kept the wisecracks about Denise's uncle to himself. But it wasn't easy. The guy was a nutcase. Everyone in town knew it. He'd been some sort of filmmaker, always off in some strange country filming some strange tribe or some strange something. But then, about 3 years ago, after telling incredibly weird tales that no one believed, he suddenly disappeared. That was it. Denise's aunt woke up one morning and he was gone. No one had heard from him since. Typical, everyone said. Not surprising, they agreed. After all, he was a nutcase. Still, the man had found the bloodstone. Who knows, maybe there were other things in the trunk. Who knows, after their journeys to Feyre, maybe some of his weird stories weren't so weird after all. At least that's what Nathan hoped, as Denise's aunt welcomed them inside, as they trudged upstairs into the dusty attic, as they found the old steamer trunk off in the corner, and as they lifted its heavy lid. The hinges creaked and groaned. At last they had it opened, and when they looked inside, they found...
Nothing? How can that be?
But she was right. There was nothing but a bunch of old, musty clothes and faded photographs. Well, almost nothing. Because when they dug through the pile of clothes and reached the bottom, they did find something.
Take a look at this.
Nathan pulled out a dusty old camera. At least that's what it looked like it was. But it had no lens. In fact, it was even hard to tell which was the front or the back. After looking it over, he shrugged and tossed it on the pile of clothes.
How about this?
Denise removed a thin, flat stone. It was gray, perfectly smooth, and about the size of a large writing pad.
Let me see.
Before she could stop him, Nathan yanked it from her hands and turned it over. But there was nothing more to it. No writing, no markings, nothing.
Figures.
He sighed as he tossed it beside the camera.
I was right. Your uncle was a nutcase.
He glanced back into the trunk. There was nothing left but a rusty jackknife, some scratched sunglasses, and a beat-up audio cassette tape.
I knew there wouldn't be anything here.
Denise pulled out the tape. It was caked in dirt and had no label. Nathan continued.
I don't know why I let you talk me into these stupid things.
Denise didn't answer, but licked her fingers and rubbed at the dirt. Slowly, something began to emerge.
Nathan, take a look at this.
He moved closer. Underneath the grime, there was the faint scribbling of a pen. Denise kept rubbing, careful not to remove the ink until they both saw the words, "Greetings from Bic." They stared in silence. Well, Nathan knew all about Bic, the kingdom of math and science. He knew this was the kingdom where Denise had created Gus and Gertie. And he knew it was the kingdom where Josh had studied Imager's logic on the computer. He raised his eyes to Denise. She raised her eyes to him. Then, without a word, they both leaped to their feet and headed for the stairs. It was time to find a cassette player, and fast.
Where am I?
Josh groaned as he stirred on the cot. After several moments, he was finally able to pry open his eyes. He winced at the light.
What's going on?
We have arrived at the kingdom of perfection.
Josh did not recognize the voice. It was different from the coach's. He rose to his elbows, looking for whoever spoke. Then he spotted him. It was the blue ice ball.
We are in the first realm, the realm of appearance.
Josh searched until he spotted the coach standing nearby.
Your pet, he talks.
Yes, it's amazing what you can teach them with a little patience.
The blue orb gave a tight smile, then muttered,
It is one of my many talents.
Returning to the subject, he continued,
In this first realm, you may change your appearance until you are absolutely perfect.
Josh threw his feet over the side of the cot and stood. Well, stood might not be the right word, for there was no ground to stand upon. Neither were there any trees or buildings or mountains. But there were people, layers of them piled as high as the eye could see. They weren't standing or lying on top of each other. Instead, they were divided into levels, each level floating about 10 feet above the next. It was as if they were in a 1,000-story office building, but without ceilings or floors, just layers of floating people. As Josh looked up, he saw hundreds of these levels floating above him, and as he looked down, he saw hundreds of them floating below. The only other thing he noticed was the screaming. It was hideous. The blue pet continued his explanation.
Each level is a step closer to physical perfection. The greater your perfection, the higher your level.
Floating was an interesting sensation, and Josh enjoyed it, but it was the screaming that concerned him. He'd never heard people in such agony.
What's all that screaming about?
Dear heart.
The coach drifted closer, seeming to ignore the question.
What is your least favorite feature?
What do you mean?
What do you hate most about your appearance? What is your greatest physical imperfection?
I don't know. Probably my nose. It's always seemed just a little too big.
Then make it smaller.
The blue orb suggested.
What?
Push on your nose and make it smaller.
Yeah, right.
Trust him, dear heart.
The coach smiled.
Do as he says.
Josh looked at her, then to her pet. Well, they were serious. Of course, it was a weird request, but let's face it, this place wasn't exactly unweird. Besides, what would it hurt? So with a shrug, Josh gave his nose a little push.
Ah!
He screamed as incredible pain shot through his nose and face, but it was gone as quickly as it had come.
What's wrong, dear heart?
I don't know.
Josh rubbed his nose.
Wait a minute. I don't believe it. My nose! It's smaller! My nose is smaller!
Of course.
As the pet spoke, the three of them started floating up to the next level of people.
What's going on? What's happening?
Do not worry. As we said, the greater your perfection, the higher your level. With enough hard work, you will reach a physical perfection greater than any of these others.
This is incredible!
They finally arrived at the next level.
You mean I can change my looks any way I want?
Until you reach perfection.
Wow!
Then it's off to the second realm of this kingdom.
The coach smiled.
The realm of perfect popularity.
This is so cool!
Then an idea came to mind. He reached down and grabbed a hold of one of his legs.
What are you doing?
I've always wanted to be taller.
He gave his leg a tug.
Imagine what I could do on the basketball court if... Ow!
There was the pain again. Only this time it was in his leg, and it was worse.
What was that? Why does it hurt so much?
Each level of perfection is more painful than the next. That is the screaming you hear.
Josh looked about. It was true. Everyone around him was shaping and reforming their bodies, and each time they did, they screamed in gut-wrenching agony.
But why?
The pet replied,
Working toward perfection is a painful thing. It requires much work. Only a few are strong enough to pursue it.
And they are the ones you must beat to enter the next realm.
Josh glanced about.
Is there only one winner?
In each group, yes. And this is your group.
The coach stretched out her arm to all the levels. Then, leaning closer, she added,
It is a strong group, but you're not afraid of a little competition, are you?
Josh shook his head.
No, of course not, but all of this pain, all of this screaming.
The coach's smile faded slightly. Clearing her throat, she quickly changed subjects.
Dear heart, are you going to continue keeping one leg shorter than the other? Do you not wish to enter the next level?
Josh frowned as he tilted back his head to see the hundreds of levels above him.
I don't know, guys. It's a long ways up there.
The coach sighed.
Perhaps you are right. Perhaps it is too much effort for you to pursue a perfect body. Of course, that means you will never enter the second half of the kingdom, the realm of perfect popularity, but...
No, wait a minute. I didn't mean...
If he's not perfect in body and popularity, then he'll never be able to enter the sea of justice. He'll never receive what he truly deserves.
I understand. But if he does not wish perfection, no one can force him to...
Hold it! Wait a minute! I didn't say I didn't want it. I just said, well... What I mean is...
Yes?
The blue pet floated closer, also waiting. Josh coughed, then forced himself to continue.
No. Great. Good. It all sounds great to me. Let's get on with it.
The coach tilted her head at him skeptically.
No, honest. I mean, who wouldn't want to have a perfect body and be super popular? After all, that's why we're here, right? Besides, that Sea of Justice is definitely something I want to visit.
Are you certain, dear heart?
Yeah, sure.
Because if you're not, we can...
No, I'm sure. Trust me on this. I'm sure.
Well then, Joshua O'Brien, shall we continue?
Josh swallowed, then nodded. They waited. He waited, until he suddenly realized it was his move. Taking a deep breath, Josh bent down to his shorter leg and grabbed it with both hands. Then he began to pull.
Ah!
The pain was unbearable, but once he succeeded, it stopped as quickly as it began. As before, they slowly rose toward the next level. And as they floated, was it Josh's imagination, or had he caught the coach and her pet exchanging grins? Well, maybe it was pride over his accomplishment. Maybe it was something else. But it didn't matter. At the moment, he had other things on his mind. There was so much more he needed to fix to become perfect. Denise stood over the portable cassette player in her room, looking puzzled at Nathan. They'd raced all the way to her house, thrown on the cassette tape, and for what? To hear this gibberish?
What's he saying?
Denise frowned as she listened.
I can't make it out. I mean, it sounds like Bud, but...
Again the tape spoke. Denise's scowl deepened.
It sounds familiar, but... Wait a minute.
She quickly reached for the canteen on her belt and began unscrewing the lid.
What are you doing?
Remember whenever we go to Fey Ra?
She began pouring the liquid letters from the canteen into her hands.
Remember how we have to put the stream's water in our ears to understand people?
Right, of course.
Quickly, Denise splashed the liquid letters into her left and right ears. Then she poured them into Nathan's eager hands for him to do the same. The cassette player said,
Very good, guys. I knew you'd figure it out.
Bud, can you hear us? Bud?
Of course I can hear you. I'm not deaf.
But how can you hear us? This isn't a cell phone, it's a cassette player.
And I'm talking to you on a cassette.
Denise and Nathan frowned at each other.
Peculiar, ha.
The children nodded. Bud continued.
Remember Olga, the computer?
Again, the two looked at each other.
Hello?
Of course. Olga, the supercomputer.
Well, remember how through probability she knows everything you'll ever say or do before you do it?
Yeah?
Well, she's printed out exactly what you'll say before you say it, complete with each of your pauses and facial expressions. So all I have to do is answer them.
You mean this is a tape you recorded ahead of time?
By your measurements, 17 years ago to be exact. In fact, I recorded this and gave it to your uncle before you were ever born.
You knew my uncle?
Well, not yet, but we'll be meeting soon.
Slowly, Denise pieced it together. The kids looked at each other in amazement. Things were getting stranger by the second.
You don't believe me, do you?
Well, Bud, it's a little hard to...
Go ahead then. Turn me off.
What?
Press stop, then press rewind for a second.
They hesitated.
Go ahead.
Figuring they had nothing to lose, Denise reached over and pressed stop.
Now what?
But the tape did not answer.
I guess go ahead and press rewind.
Denise pressed rewind for a brief moment and then pressed the play button again.
You don't believe me, do you?
The tape repeated exactly what it had said before. There was a pause and then...
Go ahead then. Turn me off. Press stop, then press rewind for a second.
Another pause.
Go ahead.
Denise and Nathan were astonished. It really was a tape recording.
Now do you believe me?
Denise and Nathan both nodded in stunned silence.
Good. Now listen very carefully. Nathan, it's just as you figured. Bobuk and the illusionist have taken Joshua.
But where? Why?
Remember how Joshua wanted justice? How he wanted everything to be fair?
Again, Denise and Nathan nodded.
Well, Bobuk and the illusionist have talked him into the kingdom of perfection.
The what?
The kingdom of perfection. It's a place where you work on your body and your popularity until you finally think you've reached perfection.
Sounds like Josh to me.
But it's a dangerous trap. No one can reach perfection by working at it. It is only a means to lure Josh into the dreaded Sea of Justice.
Sea of Justice?
That is correct.
What is it?
There was a long pause on the tape.
Bud, are you still there?
At last, Bud continued.
They want to lure him into the sea to destroy him.
What?
I'm sorry, but that's their plan. In the Sea of Justice, Joshua will be destroyed by his own imperfections.
Then we have to rescue him.
No, you will be destroyed as well. Only perfect creatures can enter the Sea of Justice.
But we have to do something.
What about Aristophanes, or Lister Q and Samson?
Theirs is the same problem. They also are not perfect.
That's my brother. We've got to help him.
Nathan practically shouted at the cassette player.
No, that's exactly what Bobuk and the illusionists want. They're using Joshua as bait to lure both you and the Phaeronians to destruction.
So what are we supposed to do? Just sit around on our hands and...
I understand your frustration.
So what are we going to...
Fortunately, Olga indicates that there are a number of perfect people in your kingdom. People who have no imperfection. All you have to do is find them and convince them to rescue Joshua.
Perfect people?
How? How are we supposed to find them?
There was a long pause.
Bud?
Finally, he answered.
I honestly don't know.
What?
But you'll know, no? Olga assures me that when you find them, you'll know.
But where do we look? Where do we begin?
Again, there was no answer.
Bud, answer us! Bud!
There was still no answer. Instead, there was a loud click as the play button popped up. The tape had come to an end. Denise and Nathan looked at each other in alarm.
Turn it over. There's got to be something on the other side.
Right.
Denise pressed the eject button and flipped the tape over.
Hurry! Hurry!
At last she got the tape into the machine and pressed play. The voice finally said,
I'm back.
Bud,
Nathan tried to sound calm but was doing a lousy job of it.
you said we'd know these perfect people when we see them.
Yes.
But how?
Go to the mall.
What?
Please don't make me keep repeating myself. We haven't much tape left. Go to the mall, and we'll talk there.
You want us to go to the shopping mall?
Yes. Now turn off this machine and wait until we're at the entrance to the mall before you turn it back on.
But...
Bud's voice grew insistent.
Now! Turn off the machine and go now!
But...
Now!
Chapter 5. The Mall.
Turn it on!
He limped toward the mall's parking lot. He'd done his best to keep up with Denise, but seemed to be falling behind with every step.
Not yet!
Denise shouted over her shoulder.
We're not at the entrance!
We're close enough!
But Denise refused until they arrived. She was first, followed by the gasping, wheezing Nathan.
Turn it on! Turn it on!
She reached to the cassette recorder and pressed play.
Nice work. I'm glad you ignored Nathan and waited until you arrived.
Denise and Nathan exchanged looks. It was still unnerving the way Bud knew everything they'd do before they did it.
We haven't much time. Let's get going.
Without a word, the two, or shall we say three, turned to enter the mall. The doors hissed and they stepped inside.
So where do we go? Where do we find these perfect people?
You still have the water from the stream?
Right here.
Denise held the canteen up to the cassette player. A couple businessmen in fancy suits gave her quizzical looks. She lowered the canteen a little sheepishly.
Remember how you had to splash the water in your ears to understand me?
Yeah.
Well, now you're going to have to splash it into your eyes.
Why?
The only way to see things as they really are is by looking through the water. Those liquid letters and words are the only way you can see truth.
Denise and Nathan hesitated.
Hurry, we don't have much tape.
Denise reached for the canteen and quickly unscrewed the lid.
Now remember, people in your kingdom do things upside down, so that's how they'll look to you.
Denise nodded as she poured the liquid letters and words into her hand.
Go ahead.
Taking a breath, she splashed the water into her eyes. And suddenly, everyone flipped upside down.
Whoa!
She staggered backward, trying to keep her balance. Now everybody in the mall was upside down, even Nathan. But not for long. Nathan grabbed the canteen and also splashed the water into his own eyes. A moment later, he too was staggering.
Yeah, well, don't worry, you'll get used to it.
But they did not get used to it, not by a long shot, because there was something else the water was doing to their vision. Not only did the people around them look like they were standing on their heads, but they looked different in other ways. Well, for starters, Denise and Nathan could see through them. Well, not completely. They still could make out their bodies and their clothing, but now everyone was semi-transparent. It was as if they were no longer made of flesh and bone. Instead, they appeared to be made out of some sort of vapor, a dark, misty fog.
This is just like the center. Everyone's clear. You can see right through them.
Denise raised her hand and looked straight through it to see Nathan.
Correct.
But there were even greater differences. Well, like the two businessmen standing nearby. The ones in the fancy suits and ties. Well, they had been in fancy suits and ties. Now they suddenly wore torn and smelly rags. And instead of standing, they were crawling around, holding out tin cups to passerbys and begging for money.
What's going on? What happened to them?
The water lets you see things as they really are. Those men may look rich on the outside, but inside they are some of the poorest people at the mall.
Nathan scoffed.
What are you talking about? They probably own the place.
They have nothing of Imager's life. They have nothing of real value.
Before Nathan could argue, Denise pointed toward a tired and worn woman. She pushed a baby stroller with one hand while dragging a screaming 3-year-old with the other. It wasn't too strange a sight. In fact, it was the type of thing you could see any day at any mall, except for one detail. This particular woman was dressed as a royal queen. That's right, a queen, complete with silk gown, velvet robe, and of course a golden scepter and sparkling jeweled crown.
What's with her?
Well, she and those like her are the leaders of your world.
No way. She's just a mom, just some housewife.
Precisely. They are the ones who prepare the next generation. They are the ones who shape and mold the future of your world.
The two kids stood staring.
This is Imager's truth. This is how Imager sees them, so this is how they are. Now, come, we must hurry.
But Denise and Nathan continued to look around, staring.
Guys.
Bud's voice sounded more urgent.
Guys, we better get going. I don't have much tape left.
Why didn't you send another one? Why didn't you send a whole case of tapes?
I will, but your uncle will lose them. Please, we must be on our way.
Where?
I don't know, anywhere. Oh, we just need to be moving.
The two started off. They half walked, half jogged as they searched the mall. They examined one Misty upside down or after another. Each was clothed differently. This one like a baker, that one like a construction worker, another like a nurse. Several appeared as slaves with heavy chains wrapped around their wrists and ankles.
I still don't know what I'm looking for.
Imager's breath.
What?
You're looking for those with Imager's breath. They are the only ones who can withstand the Sea of Justice.
How do we recognize them?
Everyone is transparent, correct? No one is solid.
Sure, but...
Even yourselves.
Again, Denise and Nathan glanced at each other. Like everyone else, they seemed to be made of the same thin, dark mist. Bud continued.
Look for the persons who are solid. They are the ones filled with Imager's breath. They are the only ones able to withstand the Sea of Justice.
Denise shook her head, still not entirely understanding as the search continued. Eventually, Bud called out,
I've only got 1 minute of tape left.
1 minute?
Make that 56 seconds.
But we haven't found anybody.
We haven't even got close.
You will. Olga's never been wrong before.
You've got to give us more clues.
If I had them, I would.
Denise tried to reason.
Bud, this isn't working. It's not...
I've only 31 seconds left.
You've got to tell us where to look.
As I've been saying, I'm not sure.
But you just can't leave us here. We've got to help Josh. You've got to show us where...
Olga says you'll succeed, so you'll succeed.
Yes, but...
4 seconds. Sorry, guys.
You just can't...
Good luck.
Bud, you can't.
Suddenly there was a loud click as the play button popped up and the cassette ended.
Bud, answer me! Bud!
But there was no answer. There was no more tape. Denise and Nathan were on their own. Back in Feyre, back in the great hall, Listerque turned from Denise's and Nathan's tapestries. He could watch no more. It was too painful. He looked to the weaver and tried to speak, to say something to convince the old man to let them go help the children. But he could say only a few words.
Uncool, is it? Uncool.
The weaver nodded. He seemed to understand, but would not budge from his position. Though the Feyronians had helped on earlier adventures, they must not interfere on this one. Aristophanes gave it a try.
It doesn't make sense that we can't go and explain. We'd be helping them miss all this confusion and pain.
The weaver gently replied.
And you would stop them from their growth. Yes, you would. Is that what you wish? To keep the children in the dark? To keep them ignorant of Imager's breath?
Well, no.
Aristophanes glanced to the floor, a little embarrassed.
I didn't mean that.
The weaver continued.
To be rebreathed is an upside-downer's greatest honor. Yes, it is. Would you deprive your friends of that honor?
Aristophanes did not answer. No one did. Until Samson chattered loudly. He hovered right in front of Joshua's tapestry and looked very concerned. Very, very concerned. Aristophanes and Listerque crowded around him. They leaned forward and carefully examined some of the darkest, most sinister threads in the tapestry. Samson was right. Things did not look good for Josh. Not good at all.
Chapter 6. Physical Perfection.
Ah!
The pain screamed through every muscle, every bone, every nerve of Joshua O'Brien's body.
You're doing fine, dear heart. Just a few more levels and you'll reach physical perfection.
But Josh was not fine. Not fine at all. It's true he had accomplished what most could not. He had nearly reached the highest level of the realm. In fact, as he looked around, he saw only a few other contestants in his group who had made it this far. All the others had failed or dropped far behind. They could not withstand the painful tortures of changing themselves. But Josh could. Josh could withstand anything, especially if it meant perfection. Unfortunately, Joshua's idea of perfection changed with each new level he entered. For starters, there were his bulging muscles. At first, bulging muscles sounded great. Nothing like being the envy of all the guys in PE, and let's not forget the benefit of a little extra female attention. First, he reshaped his arms by making them bigger than normal. But bigger arms called for bigger shoulders, so he made his shoulders bigger. But bigger shoulders called for a bigger chest, which called for a bigger waist, which called for bigger legs, which called for, well, you get the picture. And just as soon as Josh had made his body big enough, he looked around and saw that his competitors had made their bodies even bigger. So he bore down harder to make his bigger yet. But seeing what he was doing, they made theirs bigger still, which forced him to make his bigger, and on and on and on it went, each participant enlarging themselves for as long as they could endure the pain. Since being bigger and better meant, well, being the biggest and best. Soon everyone had grown so large and monstrous that they stopped looking like humans. They'd become gigantic mountains of muscle that began losing their ability to move and keep their balance. The more muscles Josh created, the slower and clumsier he became. No longer could his giant legs easily move his enormous weight. Something had to be done. He needed help. So Josh did the obvious. He created 2 more legs to help move the weight. And as he continued to expand and enlarge himself, 2 more again. The pain was unbearable, but to Josh it was worth it. He was reaching perfection. He didn't understand the occasional chuckle he heard from the coach or her pet, like when he lost his balance and fell forward onto his 6 legs. Nor did he understand the whispered comment about him looking like some giant insect. But it didn't matter. He had to win the race. He had to become the best.
What about your head? You become so wonderfully large you cannot see around yourself. Don't you need an extra head at the other end of your body?
Of course, why hadn't he thought of that? The pain was unspeakable, but with his iron determination, Josh formed another head. Next came the addition of a tail in the center of his body, then fur for the tail, then extra arms, and on it went.
How many more levels?
Sweat poured from both of his faces.
Just 2, Joshua O'Brien. Just 2 more levels to reach perfection.
Josh felt himself growing dizzy. The edges around his vision became white and blurry. The pain was too great, too overpowering. He began losing consciousness, but the coach urged him on.
You're nearly there, dear heart. You can reach physical perfection. We know you can.
What's next?
Feathers!
The pet shouted in what sounded like glee.
Imager's most perfect and beautiful creatures all have gorgeous, multicolored feathers.
Are you sure?
Of course I'm sure. Look at that creature over there.
With great difficulty, Josh moved his heads and saw feathers starting to sprout from his nearest competitor. With no other thought but to win, Josh groaned and followed suit. One by one, he forced the tiny hairs on his body to expand into brilliant multicolored feathers. Well, this was no easy task. It required complete concentration. And as each hair blossomed into a bright, gaudy feather, Josh let out an agonizing scream of pain. But he wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. If this is what made him the most perfect looking of all creation, then this is what he'd be. Finally, as the last feather grew and sprouted, Josh felt himself drifting up to the next level.
Congratulations, dear heart. You're in the lead. One more level to go.
Josh lifted his heads. Directly above him was a ceiling of what looked like sand.
I can't go through that.
Yes, you can. It is very thin.
You're practically there. One more level to go.
Josh was in such pain that he could barely hear.
I don't.
The words would not come. The pain was too great.
You can do it. You can do it.
I can't.
Yes, you can, dear heart. Yes, you can.
Soon you'll be physically perfect. You'll be through with this half of the kingdom. Just above you is the realm of perfect popularity.
And then the Sea of Justice. The sea is waiting for you.
What's left? How many?
Just one more transformation.
What is it?
Your brain. Transform your brain to be like ours.
What?
So you can hear our thoughts.
You're crazy. I can't.
There was a piercing scream just below them. All three looked down and saw the only remaining competitor sprout the last of his feathers and slowly rise toward them.
Hurry! He's gaining! You must reach the next realm before he does.
I can't!
If you don't, he will win and you will lose.
All your work will be in vain.
But not my brain! I can't give you my brain!
The other creature had finally drifted to his level. Now he and Josh were neck to neck.
If you don't change your brain, we cannot communicate. We cannot help you through the next realm.
But it's all I have left.
The other creature cried in pain and began to rise. He was about to pass Josh and enter into the next realm.
Here!
The coach shoved something hard and blue into one of Josh's hands.
It's a communicator. Wrap your ear around it.
What?
If you will not give us your brain, then wrap an ear around this. It will allow you to hear us.
But...
The creature continued rising. Any second and he'd break through into the next realm to win.
Now! Do it now!
Hurry!
Josh grabbed one of his ears and wrapped it around the tiny device. He screamed and immediately shot upward. It was going to be close. He was beside the creature now, just inches to go. He stretched out his neck as far as he could, and that did the trick. Josh struck the sand and broke through just a fraction of a second before the other creature.
You did it!
Congratulations, dear heart. You're physically perfect. You've reached the next realm with all the other perfect creatures.
Josh raised his heads and looked about. All around him were other creatures, winners from other races, each of their bodies as strange and different as his own. Denise and Nathan raced through the mall, continuing their search. Bud said they had to find perfect people, that only perfect people could save Joshua, but Bud wasn't there. The tape had run out, and now they were on their own.
Look out!
They rounded a corner, and he quickly yanked Denise back. Directly in front of them were hundreds of runners. They were all dressed in track shoes and running shorts. Like everybody else, they were upside down and semi-transparent, but these runners weren't running. Oh, sure, their legs were pumping up and down, and they were breathing hard, but they never moved forward, not an inch. Nathan called to the nearest runner.
Who are you? What are you doing?
I'm racing.
Why?
The runner jabbed his thumb at the rest of the group.
Because they are.
Why are they racing?
Because I am.
Nathan scowled.
Where are you racing to?
Wherever they are.
And they're racing?
Nathan already suspected the answer.
Wherever I am.
Well, that about wrapped it up in the logic department. Well, this is weirder than the housewife queen or the beggar businessman. Nathan had never heard such backward thinking. Then again, maybe it wasn't backward. Maybe it was just upside down. Denise called to another runner.
What about you? Why are you running?
Because they are.
And they're running.
Denise paused, waiting for the obvious.
Because I am. Come on, let's get out of here.
He turned toward the TV store, but Denise tried one last time. With a loud voice, she shouted to the entire group.
Don't any of you know why you're running?
The answer came back loud and clear and in perfect unison.
Because they are!
Denise shook her head, then turned to Nathan. And just in time, she cried,
Look out!
Nathan looked up to see a slithering black tentacle shoot out of a display window of the nearby TV and video store. It came from one of the big screen TVs and passed as easily through the window as if it wasn't there. Yet, where it came from wasn't as important as where it was going. It was going straight for him. Nathan froze, unsure where to run. Denise saved him the effort. She dove into the air and tackled him hard to the ground, just as the tentacle swooshed above their heads, missing them by inches. Quickly, they scrambled back to their feet and turned to the display window. And what Nathan saw there made him go cold. A dozen big-screen TVs were playing, and reaching out from each and every one was a long, slimy tentacle. A few of the tentacles, like the one that had tried to catch him, flipped and flopped around the floor searching for a careless victim. But most had already found somebody. Most had already wrapped around a passing child or adult and dragged them forward until their faces pressed flat against the display window. At first the people fought and struggled, but as the tentacles forced them to stare at the TV screens, they slowly stopped fighting, as if they had lost the will to resist. Nathan warned Denise.
Don't look at the screens. Whatever you do, don't look at the...
But he was too late. Denise was already looking.
What's that?
Her voice sounded fainter and far away.
Don't look!
But Nathan never finished his sentence. The slithering tentacle that had tried to capture him now headed for Denise.
Denny, get out of the way!
But Denise didn't move. She remained staring at the TV.
Don't worry. There's nothing wrong with watching.
It's coming straight for...
Everybody's watching.
Denny!
He shook her, but he was too late. The tentacle wrapped itself around her waist and started dragging her toward the window. Nathan stayed at her side, punching and hitting the thing for all he was worth, but it did no good.
Denny!
The tentacle pulled her to the TV display window to join the other helpless victims.
Denny!
Nathan was frantic. Then an idea came. He reached down and yanked the canteen from Denise's belt. He quickly unscrewed the cap. Then he began pouring the liquid letters and words onto the tentacle. Every place they touched hissed and smoked, burning deep into the creature. The tentacle thrashed and whipped in agony, its flesh sizzling and popping until it finally released Denise and made a hasty retreat.
Denny, can you hear me? Denny!
At first, Denise did not respond. All she could do was stare glassy-eyed at the TV in front of her. It wasn't until he forced her head around to look at him and shouted,
Denny!
Did life slowly return to her eyes. She gave a confused smile.
Oh, hi, Nathan. What's up? What happened?
What happened?
Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed her arm and pulled her from the window.
Come on, we're getting out of here.
Denise protested, looking about the mall.
But the people. We've got to find the perfect people.
There's nobody perfect around here. Everyone is upside down and all misty and just plain weird. No one here has Imager's breath.
So where do we look? Bud promised us that we'd find them, so where do we look?
Nathan didn't have a clue. Maybe Bud was wrong. Maybe they'd never find the perfect people. Maybe no one could save Joshua from Bobuck and the illusionist. Maybe he really would be destroyed in the sea of...
Wait a minute.
Denise's face suddenly lit up.
What about a church? If we're looking for perfect people, maybe we should try a church.
A church?
Nathan sounded skeptical. He didn't know much about churches or churchgoers. Oh, sure, a lot of kids in his class went to Sunday school and stuff, but from what he'd seen, they were anything but perfect.
No, listen. Our neighbors across the street go to church, and they're pretty cool. And my cousins, they're all right.
Okay.
Nathan shrugged, figuring they'd give it a try.
So where's the closest church?
Over there.
Denise pointed to a row of public telephones.
What?
In the phone book. Let's look one up in the phone book.
Chapter 7. The Realm of Popularity.
What is this place? Josh wondered as he rolled his two feathery heads from side to side. All around him were creatures of every imaginable shape and size. Some as big as buildings, others as small as bugs, some with one body and 100 heads, others with 100 bodies and no head. Anxious to investigate, Josh lumbered forward on his 6 legs. Well, actually, he did a lot more falling than lumbering. When you're only used to 2 legs, having 6 can be a little confusing. But at least there was ground to fall upon. Ah, blessed, beautiful, dependable ground. What a relief! No more floating around like in that last realm. There were also other features he appreciated, like rocks and sand and trees, even a sun or two. As far as Josh could tell, he was on some sort of beach, but it was the ocean washing up onto the beach that really caught his attention. Instead of water, it seemed to be made of metal, but a very shiny metal, as shiny as if it were pure silver.
You there, the new kid?
Josh turned his heads to see what could only be described as a walking set of encyclopedias. Well, that's right. The creature looked like 26 separate books all linked together. Somewhere in the middle, about the M volume, there was a small mouth and a pointed nose. And on both sides of that, about the L and N volumes, there were 2 narrow eyes.
Hello!
Joshua tried his best to sound cheery. Even here he was concerned about making the right impression. He wanted to reach out and shake hands, but with 4 additional limbs to choose from, he wasn't exactly sure which one to offer.
Welcome.
Josh nodded and asked,
Listen, would you mind telling me where I am?
The encyclopedia gave a gentle laugh.
My, you really are ignorant, aren't you?
And suddenly, Josh felt a numbness race through his mind, a tingling sensation as if part of his brain was going to sleep, as if his memory was being erased. He grabbed both of his heads and staggered backward. The creature's opinion of him was immediately becoming true. He was growing more ignorant.
No!
But it was too late. By the time he looked up, the creature had moved away. He had left, and with him went most of Josh's intelligence. In fact, Josh had grown so ignorant that it was all he could do to remember his own name.
What's going on? Somebody please help me!
The coach's pet answered through the communicator in Josh's ear.
It's the second half of the kingdom, the realm of perfect popularity.
It took all of Josh's concentration to remember the little blue ball.
What happened?
In the realm of popularity, you become exactly what people think you are.
The voice of the coach explained,
Here, you literally become their opinion of you.
Josh stared blankly ahead, trying to understand.
They think you are stupid, so you become stupid. If they think you are smart, you become smart.
Josh protested.
But that's not fair. Becoming what people think of you.
Of course it is. You, dear heart, have lived your entire life for what people think of you. Here, at last, you will become exactly that. It is entirely fair, because it is entirely what you wanted.
But
Josh tried to argue. However, since he had no further thoughts on the subject, well, it seemed a little pointless. Come to think of it, he had no further thoughts on any subject, not anymore. But he did have a question.
Can I ever, get smart again?
Of course.
How?
Just convince someone to think you're smart.
That's it?
That's it.
That's what this realm is all about. And that's the way you become perfect enough to enter the sea of justice. Convince everybody that you're perfect, and just like that, you'll be perfect.
Hey, you!
Josh spun around just in time to see a giant rock rolling down the beach at him. And we're not talking your average run-of-the-mill giant rock. We're talking your top-of-the-line boulder, one big enough to crush a small house or a muscle-bound insect.
Oh, hi there.
Josh tried to sound calm as the rock continued rolling at him. But even Josh's limited intelligence could figure out that this rock had no intention of slowing down for a friendly chat. It seemed to have only one purpose, to flatten him, and it would succeed in just seconds.
No, don't. Please Please stop! Don't hit me!
The boulder gave a hearty chuckle and picked up speed, rolling even faster. With Josh's lack of mental skills, it was tough to figure out what to do, but eventually he realized he had two choices: run or, run! It was a difficult decision, but after much concentration and only one lucky guess, he made the correct choice. As he took off running, the boulder roared with laughter.
My oh my, if you ain't just about the scaredest, most chickenest thing I've ever seen.
Before Josh knew it, terror filled his mind. Any courage he had had quickly disappeared. His heart began pounding. He began running around in panicky little circles, screaming,
Help me! Help me! Help me!
Until at last he spotted a huge piece of driftwood and scrambled under it for cover. The boulder changed course and headed off in another direction, laughing all the way. He had decided Josh was a coward, and that is what Josh had become. Now Joshua was consumed by fear, mindless, irrational fear, and not fear of one thing or another, but fear of everything. The pet cooed through his communicator.
Relax.
What's happening?
Josh screamed as he continued to kick and fight his way further under the driftwood.
As I said, in this realm you become exactly what people think of you.
How do I change it? How do I change?
Convince them to think differently. That's the only way to be perfect enough to enter the sea of justice. You must make everybody think you're perfect.
But they'll hurt me.
Joshua O'Brien, you've devoted your entire life to impressing people. You'll do splendidly here.
By the time Denise and Nathan arrived at the church, the effect of the water was wearing off. Oh, they still occasionally caught glimpses of people as Imager saw them, but for the most part things were starting to look pretty normal again. And that was good. Denise in particular was getting a bit tired of looking at everybody upside down all the time, not to mention seeing them as they really were instead of how they pretended to be. But what really cinched it for her was the traffic jam at 3rd and Franklin. Cars were backed up for blocks. Drivers honked and shouted and screamed. At least that's how it appeared to everybody else. But because of the water from the stream that was still in her eyes and ears, Denise saw things a little differently. Oh, true, everybody was still angry and upset, but instead of firing their mouths off at one another, they were firing off guns. That's right. Denise saw drivers using everything from pistols to bazookas, rifles to rocket launchers. For her, the intersection had become a war zone, literally. People were diving from their cars, shouting, cursing, blasting away with machine guns, blowing one another up with grenades. Needless to say, she and Nathan hightailed it out of there as fast as they could. Now, at last, they were seated in the office of some church. They had already spoken with the Reverend for several minutes until he had to leave the room and take care of a disturbance in the lobby. He promised to be back in just a moment. As they waited for his return, Denise whispered,
Are you sure about this place? I mean, if this is a church, aren't there supposed to be crosses or Bibles or something?
How should I know? The phone book says it's a church, so it's a church.
Denise threw a suspicious look out the window to the fancy sports car in the Reverend's parking space, then to the expensive antique furniture filling his office, and finally to the plush carpeting at her feet. From what she'd heard of churches, this didn't exactly fit the bill, but what did she know? Suddenly the carved oak doors opened and the Reverend returned.
Sorry about that.
He glided toward his desk. He was tall, handsome, and had a beautiful silk suit. Then there was his voice, smooth, understanding, and very gentle.
That was another one of those homeless people.
He shook his head in disgust.
You know how some of them can be. But not to worry. We've called the police. Now, where were we?
We were asking if you knew any perfect people.
The Reverend flashed a dazzling, every-tooth-in-place smile.
Ah, yes, perfection.
He toyed with the diamond on his left pinky ring.
You must understand, Nathan, that here at Club God, we are all perfect.
You are?
Of course. And you can be, too. And you.
He turned his perfect smile upon Denise. Denise couldn't help but smile back.
How's that possible? Everybody makes mistakes.
It doesn't matter, my friend, because once you join Club God, you automatically become perfect.
I do?
That's right. All you have to do is say the magic words and you're in. Automatically forgiven, 100% clean for now and for anything you ever do in the future.
You're kidding.
No. And the best thing is, you don't have to do anything. It's absolutely free.
The Reverend gave him a wink. Denise sat there staring at the man. Something about his mouth didn't seem right. The words he spoke didn't quite fit. It was like watching one of those old Japanese monster movies dubbed into English. He was out of sync. She threw a look to Nathan, but he was too caught up in the Reverend's words to notice.
Just say the magic words. Join the club, and you're free to do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it.
Denise stifled a gasp. Before her eyes, the man began to sprout hair all over his face. And we're not talking 5 o'clock shadow hair. We're talking thick, bristly hair. It was popping out everywhere. At first she thought it was her imagination. Then she remembered the water. Maybe the effects hadn't entirely worn off. Maybe she was seeing the Reverend the way he really was.
It doesn't get any cheaper than free, does it?
No, I guess not.
Denise cautiously reached for the canteen and began to unscrew the lid. Maybe it was the water, maybe it wasn't. There was only one way to find out.
As long as you show up at the club once a week and pay your dues, you'll always be perfect.
Carefully she dipped her fingers into the canteen and raised them to her ear. She tilted her head to the right and managed to get a small drop of the liquid inside. And that was all it took. Suddenly the man's words matched his mouth perfectly, and for good reason. Now she heard what he was really saying.
I want power. I want power.
Denise's eyes widened as he continued.
I'll make you feel good, so you'll keep coming back, so my empire can grow and grow and grow.
Suddenly Denise jumped up.
Well, will you look at the time? I guess we better hit the road, huh, Nate?
Nathan and the Reverend looked at her in surprise.
What are you talking about?
You know.
She motioned toward the door.
Know what?
She gave him a look of exasperation, then tried another approach.
Homework. Yeah, that's it. Yes, sir. Gotta crack the old books. Got those big tests tomorrow. Yes, sirree.
Denny?
Yeah, Nathan?
Tomorrow's Sunday.
She pretended to laugh as she walked over to his chair, put both hands on his shoulder, and tried to lift him.
Oh, right. Of course. But you know how I like to be prepared, right, Nathan? Right?
But Nathan was too stubborn, not to mention heavy, to move. The Reverend turned his perfect smile upon Denise, and in his kindest, most sensitive voice screamed,
Listen, brat! You're ruining my sales pitch. Keep your mouth shut.
The outburst sent Denise staggering, but apparently she was the only one who heard it. He turned back to the Reverend.
Can't you see we're on to something here? Now, what were you saying?
Denise felt like an idiot. Of course, that was nothing new, but the water from the stream had never been wrong before. No way was this place a church, at least not a real one, and no way was this guy a real Reverend.
I was simply wondering, how much money do your parents make a year?
Denise could feel the tops of her ears getting hot. She reached for the canteen. If Nathan wouldn't listen to her, then she'd make him hear for himself. As discreetly as possible, she poured a small handful of the liquid into her palm.
Oh, Nathan!
What is it now? Can't you see I'm...
She threw the handful of water at his ear. Well, that was her target. Unfortunately, as he turned his head, the target moved. Instead of getting an earful of water, Nathan got a faceful. To be more precise, an eyeful.
What are you trying to prove?
Nathan angrily wiped his face with his sleeve. Then he looked back to the Reverend and suddenly screamed.
Ah!
He jumped up and stumbled backward over his chair.
What is it?
Nathan pointed at the Reverend.
A wolf! He's a wolf!
What has the brat done now?
See for yourself, Denny. He's a wolf! A wolf!
Quickly, Denise splashed some of the water into her own eyes. Now she could hear and see. And Nathan was right. The Reverend had become a wolf, a snarling, ravenous wolf. The hair she'd seen earlier suddenly made sense, but it wasn't hair, it was fur. Fur that covered his entire body. The animal growled as he leapt to his desk and began pacing back and forth on all fours.
I will be the biggest. My kingdom will grow and grow and grow.
Thank you, Reverend. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Nathan backed up toward the door. He groped for the doorknob.
We'd love to stay, but like Denny said, we have a lot of things to do, so, bye-bye!
He turned the knob and quickly threw open the door. They dashed out of his office and were on the street in seconds. That's when Denise heard the eerie, unnerving cry. She'd never actually heard a wolf howl before, but that is exactly what she heard now. A lone wolf howling, crying over the meal that had just slipped through his clutches.
Chapter 8. Perfection at Last.
It took all of the concentration Josh had left, not to mention courage, to finally start believing the coach. Maybe she was right. Maybe he really could survive in this realm of perfect popularity. After all, he had spent his whole life trying to be popular. He had devoted all of his energy to impressing people. Things really weren't that much different here. First, he had to regain his intelligence, to convince someone that he was smart so he could be smart again. Well, that meant finding a creature even more ignorant than himself.
Over there.
Where?
I hear a dog barking.
Not far away, Josh saw a French poodle type of creature jumping up and down in the air.
But he'll bite me.
Go ahead. He won't hurt you.
But...
Do it. Convince him you're smarter.
But...
Do you want to stay like this forever?
No, but...
Hurry! Hurry!
Reluctantly and more than a little frightened, Josh stepped forward and called to the animal.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
The poodle continued jumping mindlessly into the air.
If it's not too much trouble, if you don't mind, could I talk to you a second? Right.
He took a breath for courage and continued.
Look, I appear to be pretty smart, don't I? I see.
Josh didn't see it all.
But at least I'm not jumping into the air and yapping my head off, right? So, since I'm not annoying everybody and making a total fool of myself as you are, well, wouldn't that at least make me smarter than you?
Although the dog appeared to be thinking of nothing, something must have been happening inside her little brain, because suddenly Joshua felt intelligence returning. Not a lot, but a little. But that was only the beginning. Now he had to find other folks with equal or less intelligence than the poodle and convince them. No problem. He approached a professional wrestler type and asked the same question. The results were the same, and he grew even smarter. Next, there was the teen covered in tattoos who had more rivets in her body than a naval shipyard. Another success. And on he went. Now he had to regain his courage by convincing someone more cowardly than himself that he was courageous. Fortunately, there was a chicken-like creature pecking away in the nearby sand. And since a chicken is the most timid animal in the universe, why do you think they're called chickens? It took only a second to get her to run from him, flapping her wings and clucking for her life. As she did, she must have thought how brave he was, because suddenly he had instant courage. Next, he wanted to work on honesty. A brief chat with a used car salesman would take care of that. Unfortunately, there were no used car salesmen on the beach, so he had to settle for a politician. But the results were even better. Then came the sense of humor, then the winning personality, then the super friendliness, and on it went, Josh moving down the beach, convincing people that he was better than they were, and becoming it. His fame and popularity grew and grew, until finally the big moment arrived. He had to convince someone he was the most popular creature in the realm. But with his fantastic new personality, that shouldn't be a problem. Still, not wanting to take chances, he was careful to choose just the right creature. There, over by the rocks, a kid wearing a pocket protector who had his glasses taped together in the middle. The fact that he also wore a bowling shirt with the words Chess Club President embroidered on the back didn't hurt.
Hey there.
The kid turned to him, sniffing from about 1,000 allergies.
You're Joshua O'Brien. Why is someone as great as you talking to a loser like me?
For the briefest second, Josh felt compassion for the kid.
Well, you're not a loser.
The kid's face lit up. Well, suddenly the pocket protector disappeared.
I'm not?
Of course not.
Next to go were the taped glasses. The coach cried through Josh's earpiece.
What are you doing?
I'm just trying to help the guy.
You cannot win by helping. You must make him think you're the greatest creature alive.
Well, yeah, but...
You must insult him. You must humiliate him into thinking you are the best.
Josh hesitated. He'd always looked out for the underdog, not put them down.
Well, the kid's got some good qualities.
There was a ripping sound, and he turned to see the kid's bowling shirt was replaced by a muscle shirt. Not only that, but he'd stopped sniffing. The coach's pet shouted through the communicator.
He will overtake and destroy you. Stop making him think he's somebody.
Hurry, dear heart. Convince him you're better. Hurry, or all your effort will be in vain.
Josh nodded. He wasn't crazy about this, but he understood. It was the only way to win. He turned back to the kid and said,
Nice shirt.
The kid stood straighter.
Thanks.
Josh took a breath, hesitated, then said,
For a loser.
Suddenly the boy hunched over smaller.
Nobody wears muscle shirts anymore.
Suddenly the bowling shirt was back on.
They don't?
Of course not. And if you were cool and popular like me, you'd know that, wouldn't you?
Now the glasses returned, until the boy looked down to the sand in embarrassment and they fell from his face. He dropped to his hands and knees searching for them, but couldn't see a thing. Josh wanted to help, but he knew the rules. He had to win at any cost.
Hey, loser! Look at me when I'm talking to you.
Slowly the boy looked up, squinting toward Joshua.
Who's the most popular person in the realm?
The kid muttered something and returned to his search. Joshua knew what should be next, but he just didn't have the heart.
Do it! Do it!
But...
Do it now!
Reluctantly, Josh dug one of his feet into the sand.
Do it! Do it! Do it!
And then sadly, he kicked it into the boy's face. The kid started coughing and choking.
Who's the most popular person in the realm?
With even less enthusiasm, he dug another foot into the sand, threatening to kick more.
You are...
Josh felt terrible as the boy continued coughing and spitting.
You are the most popular. You are.
And suddenly, the entire beach broke into applause. Josh looked up. Everyone was clapping and grinning at him. It had happened. He had convinced someone to think he was the most popular, and just like that, Joshua O'Brien had become the most popular creature in the realm of popularity. The coach called through the earpiece.
Congratulations, dear heart. You're nearly ready to enter the Sea of Justice.
Nearly? What's left?
Simply convince someone there that you are perfect. Then you will be perfect and qualified to enter the sea.
Josh grinned.
No sweat.
He turned toward the fans that were still applauding and shouted,
Excuse me! Excuse me!
A hush fell over the group. The great Joshua O'Brien was about to speak.
None of you can ever recall me making a mistake, can you?
He looked to the ground, pretending to be modest.
Then, could that mean... Oh, no, never mind. It's just...
He gave a shrug.
It's just... Well, if I've never made a mistake, and since I've got this perfect body, and I'm the most popular person in the realm, doesn't that kind of, make me sort of perfect?
The crowd began to buzz. Apparently the thought had never crossed their minds. But now that he mentioned it, they began to shout,
Yes, you are perfect. You are the most perfect creature we have ever seen.
And suddenly, just like that, Joshua O'Brien became perfect.
Excellent, dear heart. Simply excellent. Now hurry before someone challenges you. Hurry and enter the Sea of Justice.
Josh looked around.
But where? I don't see any.
It's that ocean beside you.
That?
Josh pointed at the silvery water along the beach.
That is the Sea of Justice?
Precisely.
But I can't swim in that. I can't.
Dear heart, it only appears to be liquid metal. Touch it with your feet. Enter it, and you will see it is merely mirrors. Perfectly fashioned, beautiful mirrors.
But I don't...
We'll be with you. In the reflections, we'll be with you.
Josh threw a look to the crowd. They were starting to fidget. Any moment one of them might think he was weak or afraid or, worse yet, imperfect. And if anyone thought that, he knew what would happen. Josh turned back to look at the silver water.
Hurry before you are challenged. Hurry!
Josh closed his eyes a moment, took a deep breath, and started toward the ocean. It was exactly as the coach had promised. As soon as his feet touched the silvery liquid, he realized it wasn't liquid at all. Instead, the sea was made of mirrors. Nothing but beautiful mirrors. Mirrors reflecting in every direction. Mirrors that parted, allowing his feet to touch the dry, sandy floor below. The crowd cheered as Josh waded deeper into the Sea of Justice. Soon he was up to his knees, then his waist. Not a single mirror touched him. Each gently parted to the side as he waded in deeper and deeper.
You should see this place.
We are not even worthy to approach it.
But we may enter its reflections.
I wish Denny and Nathan could see this.
Oh, they will, dear heart. They will. Not only will they see it, but so will your friends from Thera.
Aristophanes and Lystroq?
Josh's excitement grew.
And that bothersome bug. At last the trap has been set.
Trap?
Treat. Fido meant treat, didn't you, boy? Treat.
Yes. Treat. The treat of justice. The treat of receiving all that you rightly deserve.
But how?
Look deeply into the mirrors, dear heart. Look deeply into the mirrors, and you will understand perfectly.
He lied to us.
Nathan slumped into the beanbag chair in Joshua's room. It had been a long day of searching with plenty of surprises, but no results.
The guy flat out lied to us.
I don't think Faeronians can do that.
Bud's not from Feyre, he's from Bic, remember?
Same thing. And I don't think they can make mistakes. Not with that Olga computer thing of theirs.
Yeah, right.
Then, motioning to the canteen on her belt, he added,
And a lot of good that water did us. Who are we kidding? We'll never be able to find perfect people. We'll never be able to help my brother.
But Denise had stopped listening. She was looking down at the canteen. Nathan watched as she turned and headed directly for Joshua's dresser. There was a small dish that he used to dump his loose change and pocket junk into. She picked it up and dumped it out.
What are you doing?
She didn't answer. Instead, she removed the canteen from her belt, unscrewed the lid, and poured some of the water into the dish. Nathan rose to join her.
Danny?
Next, she grabbed one of the dozen campaign buttons lying around. Carefully, she positioned its photo over the dish of water. Then she lowered her head for a better view.
What are you doing?
Her answer was a breathless whisper.
Look, do you see it?
See what? Where?
In the water. The reflection. It's different than what we see.
Different? What are you talking about?
I saw it the first time we were in Feyre, and this morning in my bedroom.
Nathan lowered his head until it was beside hers. At first he saw nothing, but as she adjusted the angle of the photo, he finally caught a reflection of it in the water. It was not a reflection of his grinning, good-looking brother. It was a reflection of Joshua, yes, but a Joshua with grotesque muscles, multicolored feathers, and Nathan sucked in his breath and moved closer. This Joshua had 6 legs and 2 heads.
Danny! What's going on? Danny, we gotta help him!
But how? How?
Over in Feyre, at the Great Hall, Aristophanes, Lystroq, Samson, and the Weaver stared at Joshua's tapestry. They studied with horror the thread indicating that he was wading into the Sea of Justice.
Survive, cannot he?
Lister Q looked up from the tapestry to the weaver.
Sea of justice. It will kill him.
Aristophanes agreed.
We have to assist him. There ain't not a doubt. No way can we stay here without helping him out.
Only perfect people can enter the Sea of Justice. If you enter the sea, it will destroy you.
The old man tried to sound stern, but he knew what Josh was about to suffer. He knew something had to be done. And something would be done. He knew that as well. If the group could simply hold out and wait a few minutes longer, something would definitely be done.
Chapter 9. The Sea of Justice.
Josh waded deeper and deeper into the sea, and with every step he took, the mirrors continued to part before him. There were thousands of them, millions.
This is incredible! Everywhere I look, there are mirrors. Miles and miles of mirrors.
Immediately, the blue orb's reflection appeared in a mirror beside him.
Gorgeous, aren't they?
Josh gave a start, then nodded in agreement.
They're beautiful. But where's the rest of it?
The rest of what?
The coach's reflection appeared in another mirror beside him.
Well, I mean, they're beautiful and everything, but there's more to this place than a bunch of mirrors, right? You said something about a treat.
I'm afraid you haven't looked deep enough.
What do you mean?
Look into the mirrors. What do you see?
Nothing. Nothing but me.
Precisely.
But
have you ever seen such beauty, such perfection?
Joshua looked more deeply, and the deeper he looked, the more he liked what he saw.
Look at the curve of each of those muscles. Magnificent muscles. Muscles you have worked so long and hard to obtain.
Josh continued to stare. She was right. His muscles were marvelous to look at. They were magnificent. And the longer he stared, the more he enjoyed their beauty, their perfection.
That's the purpose of the sea, to enjoy the fruits of your labor, to receive your fullest reward.
The coach's mirror moved a little closer.
And those feathers, have you ever seen anything so beautiful, so breathtaking?
At first, Josh wasn't so sure about the feathers, but the more he looked, the more he appreciated their intricate detail, their brilliant colors.
And what of those wondrous heads of yours?
As the coach continued to speak, and as Josh continued to admire himself, a warmth of satisfaction flooded through his chest. This was him. This was the great Joshua O'Brien. The result of all of his hard work was right here, marvelously reflected in these perfect mirrors. The warmth grew warmer, the satisfaction more satisfying. At last, here in the Sea of Justice, Josh was finally able to enjoy the reward of his efforts. At last, he was receiving, well, there was no other word for it, but justice. Perfect, beautiful justice.
This is amazing. I've never felt so
proud, so full of accomplishment.
Josh could only nod.
But you've barely scratched the surface, dear heart. Look deeper, much, much deeper.
Josh obeyed. He couldn't help himself. He didn't want to help himself. As he looked deeper, something within the mirrors began to shift. The reflection of his perfect body began to waver and change.
That's it, dear heart. Look deep inside yourself. Find out who you really are.
In the mirror, Josh began to see a 5-year-old boy. He was kneeling with a handful of kids beside a terrified puppy.
That's me. That's me when I was little.
That is correct. But look deeper still.
As Josh stared, the little boy grabbed a nearby milk carton and filled it with rocks. Next, he tied the carton around the neck of the whimpering puppy. Then, as the other kids urged him on, he shouted at the animal and gave it a good kick. The puppy scurried off like a frightened rabbit. The rattling milk carton only added to its terror and confusion. He yelped and ran helplessly in all directions as everyone laughed and congratulated young Josh for a job well done.
I'd completely forgotten that.
Josh stared sadly into the mirror.
Quite the little monster, aren't you?
The charge surprised Joshua.
That was a long time ago. I'm not that way anymore.
You're not?
Before Josh could answer, another reflection formed deep within the mirrors. It was Joshua when he was 9. He stood on the playground with a crowd of other kids. They were laughing and jeering at a smaller boy who was pulling himself up out of a mud puddle, his face cut and bleeding. The Josh in the reflection tried to look away, but he was too late. The little boy caught his eyes and staggered toward him, soaked and muddy. He grabbed Joshua's shirt.
Make him stop! Please, Josh! I never stole his pen. You know I wouldn't. Please make him stop.
You sticking up for this weasel?
Young Josh turned to see a huge bully striding toward him, obviously the cause of the boy's battered face. Josh swallowed hard as he looked to the bully, then down at the boy clinging to him for protection. Someone in the group shouted,
Get out of there, O'Brien.
Yeah, move it. Get out of the way. Get out of the way.
They wanted to see a good beating, and Josh seemed to be the only one preventing it. The boy circled behind Josh, cowering, pleading to him for help, but Josh didn't look at him. Instead, he stared hard at the ground before him, saying nothing. The crowd jeered and shouted louder.
What's it gonna be, O'Brien?
Josh had no answer. The crowd grew more angry. He looked back up to their faces. They meant business, real business. He looked back to the bully. The bully meant business too. Then finally, without a word, Joshua stepped to the side. The bully lost no time in grabbing the little boy. Everyone cheered, everyone but young Josh, and of course the little boy. It's hard to cheer when you're getting the stuffing beaten out of you. Squirming in discomfort, the older Josh tried looking away, but the scene filled every mirror in the sea. No matter where he turned, he saw the little boy being hit again and again and again, as the young Josh stood by doing absolutely nothing.
There's nothing you won't do for popularity, is there?
Josh couldn't answer.
Is there?
He continued staring into the mirrors, his eyes filled with moisture. His throat grew thick and dry.
I didn't know what to do.
The beatings continued. So did the crowd's cheers. And with each blow, the mirrors surrounding Joshua moved in a little closer.
I don't want to look anymore. I came here for justice, not this.
Oh, but this is justice.
No, it isn't.
This is what you're really like, and this is what you really deserve.
Those are exceptions. Mistakes.
They are still truth, and truth demands justice.
I didn't come here to see mistakes.
Josh could not take his eyes from the mirrors.
You came to receive justice, and so you will.
But...
Josh felt himself growing desperate.
This isn't what I...
This is exactly what you wanted. And it is only the beginning, dear heart. Only the beginning.
The pet joined in the laughter as more reflections formed, as more memories flickered across the mirrors, memories of ugly mistakes, insensitive action, embarrassing failures. And as their reflections appeared, as Josh stared, unable to look away, the mirrors moved in upon him closer and closer. Back in Feyre, Aristophanes turned from Joshua's tapestry.
I don't understand what you're a-doing.
The weaver simply looked at him.
You keep a-telling us not to interfere, that Imager is using all this to get him rebreathed?
That is correct. Yes, it is.
Well, I don't see any sign of him getting rebreathed. All I see is Josh getting tortured and Denny and Nathan getting more angry and frustrated.
Samson darted above Aristophanes' shoulder and chattered in loud, high-pitched agreement. Lister Q also stepped forward.
Go in there and help him, now I say.
He reached into his coat and pulled out the cross-dimensionalizer. It appeared the weaver was about to have a mutiny on his hands, but instead of growing angry, his answer was gentle and firm.
If you enter the sea of justice, you will be destroyed.
What about Josh? He's being destroyed right now!
The weaver continued evenly.
Your love for Joshua O'Brien is most commendable. Yes, it is. But you must not interfere. You must trust that Imoger's love is greater than yours. You must not enter the sea of justice.
We have to do something!
The weaver glanced at his watch.
In exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds, you will cross-dimensionalize to Denny and Nathan.
What? You're giving us permission to visit the Upside-Down Kingdom?
Of course. Your visit has always been woven in these tapestries. If you would have looked more closely, you would have known this. It was simply a matter of time.
Right, all.
Samson darted above their heads with his own brand of high-pitched enthusiasm. And Aristophanes found an opportunity to fire off a poem.
Quick, grab that cross-dimensionalizer and enter them quadrants. We'll be seeing Denny and Nathan and telling them...
Aristophanes turned back to the weaver.
What exactly will we be telling them?
Tell them they are about to be rebreathed.
All right!
Aristophanes turned to the others, then spinning back to the weaver, he asked,
But how?
You'll know. Trust me, you'll know.
Without another word, and certainly before another poem, Lister Q reached for his cross-dimensionalizer, pressed in the 4 quadrants, and they were off. Denise stared at the reflection of Josh in the liquid letters and words. As scene after scene of his ugly past were played before him, as the mirrors moved in closer and closer, making it impossible for him to look away, he slowly dropped to his knees. Denise couldn't believe it, but he was actually starting to cry. There he was, weeping over all the wrongs he had ever done. She could take no more. She turned from the dresser and began to pace.
I don't get it. First, Bud says we can't rescue Josh because we'll be destroyed in that ocean of justice thing.
Sea of justice.
Whatever. Then he says we'll find perfect people who can go there. But of course, there are no perfect people. But of course, we don't know that until we waste the whole day looking at people standing on their heads until we're nearly eaten by some wolf. So now we're back home watching Josh get tortured, totally clueless what we can do.
Yep, that about sums it up.
She shot him a look as she headed to the window.
You'd think in his whole stupid town there'd be at least one perfect person.
She pushed up the window and opened it.
What are we supposed to do?
The only answer was a startled crow that cawed as it took off from a nearby telephone pole. Actually, there was one other answer. Just as she was about to turn from the window, Denise glanced down and noticed the bloodstone resting on the outside sill.
What on earth?
She reached down, picked it up, and brought it inside.
Look at this.
But Nathan was back at the dresser, staring at the dish of water.
Nathan, take a look at... Ow!
Nathan spun around. She dropped the bloodstone to the floor.
The bloodstone! You found the bloodstone!
Yeah, but the stupid thing burned me.
Burned you?
Yeah, it was so hot that it...
Then she spotted it. The dish of water on the dresser was boiling.
Nathan, look! That's exactly what it did last night. That's exactly what happened to the water in the canteen last night.
I know. It just started as soon as you brought the bloodstone into the room.
Denise frowned and turned back to the bloodstone on the floor.
Maybe it's trying to tell us something. Maybe.
And then she stopped. The bloodstone had started to glow again. Not only that, but it was starting to melt. Nathan took a step backward.
This is getting too weird.
Denise hesitated, then slowly knelt down for a closer look. That's when she felt the heat.
Don't get too close.
She nodded, but reached out her hand to feel its warmth. And with that warmth came the strangest sensation. As it struck her outstretched fingers, it moved up her arm and into her body. But it wasn't just warmth. It was a peace that began filling her. She inched closer and reached out her other hand.
What are you doing?
I can't explain it.
She felt a smile spreading across her face.
Nathan, do you remember the first time we were in Fey Ra? do you remember how they said the bloodstone symbolized Imager's love?
Yeah, so?
Her smile broadened and she scooted even closer.
Denny!
Do you remember the power it had to free you from the menagerie, to help us through the portal?
Of course I do, but
I think this stone is more than just a symbol.
What are you talking about?
I think this bloodstone is...
She leaned closer to it and giggled.
I think this bloodstone is like a part of Imager.
You're crazy!
She shook her head.
No. Come, feel the heat.
No way, I'm not getting near it.
It's more than heat, it's...
By now her smile had broken into a full-fledged grin.
Nathan, there's a feeling to this heat. The same feeling I had when I was at the center. Nathan, it's not heat. It's love.
For a long moment she remained, warming her hands and her heart. And the longer she stayed, the more of Imager's love she absorbed. An idea began to form.
Nathan, bring over that water from the dresser.
No way! You can see how it's melting the stone already.
Bring it closer.
It could explode or blow us up or...
I doubt it.
Denise looked up at him, grinning. For some reason, he no longer got on her nerves. Now she could see past his selfishness, past his stubbornness, and everything else about him that drove her crazy. Now she saw the real Nathan O'Brien. And what she saw, well, strangely enough, what she saw she actually liked.
Nathan, with all Imager has done for us, do you really think he'd destroy us with his own bloodstone?
How should I know? He's not exactly easy to figure out.
Bring the water here.
Nathan threw a nervous glance to the boiling liquid letters and words in the dish.
Nathan!
I'll burn my fingers!
Use your shirt. Wrap your shirt around it.
Nathan looked back to the dish. His expression was changing. Denise couldn't be certain, but it looked like he'd seen another reflection of his brother, his suffering brother, his brother who could only be saved with their help. Or maybe he too was feeling the love from the bloodstone. Whatever the reason, Nathan's own fear and selfishness seemed to be fading.
All right.
He pulled out his shirt tail and approached the dresser.
But if we die, you're going to live to regret it.
He wrapped the material around the dish and cautiously picked it up. Then he turned and started toward Denise and the bloodstone. It was only a few steps, but by the time he arrived, the water was boiling so furiously and so hot that...
Ah!
The dish fell from his hand, spilling the liquid onto the floor. Well, not all of it spilled onto the floor. Much of it splashed directly onto the bloodstone. Immediately, the liquid letters sizzled and spat until the entire bloodstone was hissing and bubbling and melting. Within seconds, it had turned into a boiling, blood-red pool of liquid. Then the wind started. It began as a faint wisp or two that rose over the pool. Then the wisps came together, swirling and intertwining until they formed a small cone, a miniature whirlwind. Denise watched in amazement as the whirlwind began to grow until it was as tall as she was. As it grew, it tugged at her hair, her clothes, papers on the desk, anything in the room that wasn't nailed down. Nathan shouted over the growing roar.
What's going on?
I don't know!
And then, barely discernible over the wind, was another sound. The sound of three very familiar friends making a most welcomed entrance.
Chapter 10. Rebreathed.
Lister Q!
Aristophanes!
She raced to him and buried her face into his thick fur.
Boy, am I glad to see you.
Then, of course, there was Samson, darting over their heads, chattering at his high-pitched speed. Denise tried to jump up and give him a hug, too, but hugging a half-dragonfly, half-firefly is not the easiest thing in the world to do, especially when you're standing next to a miniature tornado that happens to be roaring away in your best friend's bedroom.
Bobak's taken Joshua!
And the illusionist. In on this, too, is she?
You know what's happening?
Aristophanes nodded.
To the Sea of Justice they have lured him away. Now you must rescue him to help brighten his day.
Denise gave a little wince. His poetry got no better with time.
We're not the ones to rescue Josh. Only perfect people can enter the Sea of Justice.
Suddenly her face lit up.
Wait a minute. That's you guys, isn't it? You're the perfect ones.
Samson fired off a short reply. Listo Q translated.
Perfect not are we. Perfection possible only for upside-downers.
There's nobody around here like that. Bud said we'd find perfect people, but we haven't found a one.
Have you looked at yourselves?
What?
What?
Aristophanes tried to explain.
You too! You're the ones! That's his plan, don't you see? But in order to be perfect, you must be rebreathed.
What do you mean, rebreathed?
The only thing perfect is Imager and his breath. You gotta let him fill you and put your old breath to death.
Whirlwind.
Listo Q pointed at the swirling cone of wind.
His breath, that's what is this.
Denise and Nathan stared, more confused than ever. Nathan ventured a guess.
You mean this wind? This wind is Imager's breath?
All three creatures nodded.
What do you mean, put our old breath to death?
Listo Q explained.
All the wrong ever did you, or ever will do, destroyed, must be it.
But how?
The bloodstone, absorb your wrong, all will it.
Both kids turned to the pool of red liquid that had once been the bloodstone. It lay on the floor, barely affected by the raging whirlwind above it.
That? That little puddle's going to take away all our wrong?
Everything you have done or ever will do, it's all gotta go so his breath will fill you.
It was Nathan's turn for skepticism.
How can that little puddle do that?
The great price long ago paid by Imager.
But you have to trust it.
What do you mean, trust?
You gotta trust in that pool. You gotta step in there, son, and breathe in his breath so your wrong is undone.
Nathan pointed at the swirling whirlwind.
You want us to step through that? And into that pool?
Precisely.
You're crazy!
Perfect only way become can you. So sea of justice, destroy you won't it.
You're crazy! No way! Absolutely not! If you think for 1 minute that...
He continued to rant and rave, but Denise barely noticed. Instead, she once again raised her hands, but this time not to the bloodstone. This time they were raised toward the whirlwind above the stone.
Denny! What are you doing?
Feel it! It's the same heat, just like the bloodstones. Nathan, I can feel Imager's love. I'm sure of it.
Listo Q translated.
And why not? It's part of Imager. His breath is it.
Denise stepped closer to the whirlwind.
Denny, get away! Get back!
But Denise wasn't listening. Ever so carefully, she reached out her hand.
Denny!
Then, even more carefully, she stretched out her fingers.
Denny, stop!
Their tips touched the swirling wall of wind. She let out a little gasp, but it wasn't from pain or even surprise. It was from the sudden knowledge that finally, after all these months, she was actually touching a part of Imager. True, it was only his breath, but some of Imager was better than none of him.
Nathan, this is incredible.
Nathan yelled something back, but she paid no attention. She was too busy making up her mind, summoning up her courage. Finally, she was ready. Slowly, inch by cautious inch, she moved forward. At last, she entered the raging, blowing whirlwind. At first, all she felt was warmth, like before, but deeper, cozier, the type you feel snuggled up in a thick quilt around a fireplace on a snowy evening. But the warmth didn't stop at her skin. It soaked deeper, into her muscles, her bones, into the very center of who she was. It was like a warm hug whose love penetrated the surface and entered her very depths. She heard Aristophanes shouting,
Step into the pool, Danny! You must step into the pool!
She looked down and noticed her feet had not yet touched the red liquid. It lay at the base of the cone just ahead of her. Still cautious, she glanced back to Aristophanes and Listo Q. They nodded encouragingly. Then she heard Samson. Well, she didn't have to understand a word of the little fellow's chattering to know what he said. The two of them were so much alike. Though they lived several dimensions apart and spoke different languages, she'd always sensed their closeness. She knew Samson wanted the best for her, and she knew that meant stepping into the pool. Slowly she raised her foot and carefully, ever so carefully, stretched it out until at last she stepped into the pool that had once been the bloodstone. Instantly she was struck by the lightness. It started in her head, as if a heavy darkness was being drained from it, as if all the confusion and muddled thinking that had plagued her whole life was being drained away. She could actually feel the darkness being pulled from her head down through her body and out her feet. She didn't know the details, but she did know that the bloodstone was removing it, draining it away. When she glanced to the room, she was astonished at how much clearer everything appeared, more real. It was as if she had been looking through smudged sunglasses her entire life, and now suddenly they were taken away. Suddenly everything looked bright, sharp, and very, very real. She felt her neck and shoulders relaxing and growing light. The dark heaviness was being drained from them as well. And as the darkness slipped away, she noticed her fears were also disappearing. Fears that she wasn't loved, fears that she was never good enough, fears that she was all alone. They were all being drained, sucked into the pool, disappearing forever. And suddenly, she broke out laughing. Oh, the outburst surprised her as much as anyone, but this new joy, this knowing that she was loved no matter what she was, no matter what she did, well, it was more than she could handle. She tried to stop but couldn't. Not that she cared all that much. As a matter of fact, she barely had any cares at all. They were all draining into the pool.
What's happening to her? Her body's getting all clear and glittery. What's happening?
Now the darkness began draining from her chest and stomach. It felt like many things, but mostly it felt like guilt. Guilt over all the wrong she had done, over all her failures. The heavy, oppressive weight of guilt simply slid away, disappearing into the pool. And for the first time in her life, Denise felt like she could breathe, really breathe, and she wanted to with all of her might. Aristophanes shouted as if reading her mind.
Yes! Breathe in! Breathe in as deep as you can! He's removing your evil so you're clear to receive all of his fullness by being rebreathed.
Denise nodded and exhaled, blowing out all of the old air from her lungs. Then she inhaled, taking the deepest breath she had ever breathed, a breath made entirely of Imager's breath.
She's getting solid again. What's going on?
Denise looked down at her body. It was true. She seemed to be filling up with something else, not the darkness as before, but a sparkling presence, a presence more real than anything else in the room. Or she couldn't explain it, but she was being filled with a different reality, a reality more pure and real than anything she had ever seen or felt, a reality that she knew was Imager himself. She looked to Nathan in astonishment. His mouth hung open. He was obviously amazed and perhaps a little jealous. He stepped closer. She could tell he wanted to join her. She could also tell that he was terrified.
Come on.
He looked through the wind into her eyes. She knew he saw her sincerity. And for the first time, she knew he saw something else. Her love.
It's incredible. Better than incredible.
He continued to look, seeming to draw courage from her gaze. She raised her hand, stretching it outside the wall of wind.
Come. Come.
Slowly, he raised his hand to hers until they were touching. He wrapped his fingers about hers. Neither took their eyes from the other. Denise's smile grew.
Come.
She pulled ever so slightly, and he responded by stepping forward. Soon the wind was blowing his hair and brushing against his face. Soon he was also smiling.
That's only the beginning. Come, step into this pool.
Nathan edged further into the wind. As it wrapped about him and encompassed him, his smile grew. He looked down at the pool. It was just inches from his feet. He looked back up to Denise. She gave a gentle nod. And then, finally, he made the decision. He stepped forward and into the pool of bloodstone. Denise watched in awe as the heavy darkness began draining from him. All of his confusion, all of his fear, all of his guilt. As it drained, he too started to laugh. So did Denise. She couldn't help sharing in his joy. Soon he was as clear as any crystal.
Now breathe. Breathe in with all of your might.
Nathan nodded, and as he breathed, he too was filled with Imager's sparkling presence, a presence more solid and pure than any reality. Denise glanced over to the Faeronians. They stood nearby watching in silent reverence. And then it happened, a blinding flash of light. Denise looked to Nathan and gasped. He was completely transformed. Suddenly he was like the reflection back in the stream at Faerah, a powerful and majestic warrior clothed in glowing armor. He looked at her with equal surprise. She glanced down and saw the reason. Now she wore a dazzling wedding gown made of shimmering pearls and light. She looked back to Nathan. He was obviously awestruck.
You're beautiful.
Denise might have blushed or better yet punched him in the gut, except she knew he was telling the truth. She was beautiful.
What's going on?
Denise could only guess, remembering part of a conversation with Listrocube back at the stream.
This must be how Imager sees us.
Nathan looked down at his new body and armor.
And since this is how Imager sees us...
Denise finished his sentence.
This is how we are.
She turned to the Faeronians for confirmation, but they were too busy dropping to their knees and bowing their heads. Meanwhile, the whirlwind was quickly shrinking and dying down. Soon it turned to nothing more than a breeze, then disappeared altogether. In a matter of seconds, the room became absolutely silent. Nathan turned to their friends.
Wow, that was incredible.
But none of the Faeronians answered. Instead, they remained on their knees with their heads bowed.
Guys, what's wrong?
Finally, Aristophanes spoke. He kept his head lowered and his eyes fixed to the ground. His voice was soft and full of respect.
Now you are clean. Now you are filled. Now you are all that Imager willed.
Denise and Nathan looked at each other, then back to the Faeronians, who still remained on their knees with their heads bowed.
Come on, guys. It's just us.
But the Faeronians did not budge.
Guys, look, this has been a lot of fun, but I got a brother to rescue, remember?
Please, I don't understand everything that's happened, but we still need your help. Please.
After another moment, Listrocube slowly rose to his feet. He reached into his coat, pulled out the cross-dimensionalizer, and handed it to Nathan, all the time keeping his eyes lowered in respect.
Remember you still how to use this?
Well, yeah, sure.
Aristophanes struggled to his feet. Not an easy job for a bear almost as round as he was tall.
And the water from the stream.
He crossed to the canteen that had fallen from the dresser and brought it back to Nathan. But he still would not look him in the eyes.
You will also be needing this.
Nathan, look!
Denise pointed to the bloodstone at their feet. It had once again turned to solid rock. She reached down and carefully picked it up. It was as cold and solid as ever.
So, what do we do now? What's the next step?
There was still no answer.
Will somebody give us a clue here?
After a moment, Samson replied. But even at his high speed, there was no mistaking the reverence in which he spoke.
What did he say?
Aristophanes' translation was simple and to the point.
Now you have Imager's breath. Now you will know.
Chapter 11. To the Rescue.
Back in the Sea of Justice, Joshua was on his knees sobbing. He had no choice. Wherever he looked, the mirrors reflected scenes of his past, every failure, every wrong, every mistake he had ever made. He'd forgotten most of those failures, but the mirrors hadn't, not a one. And as he continued to watch, the mirrors moved in closer and closer, their images filling more and more of his vision. Soon he felt the cold, hard surfaces of the mirrors touching his skin. They continued pushing in, pressing against his body, harder and harder, squeezing him from every side, tighter and tighter, until he could barely breathe.
Please, no more. I can't take no more.
But this is what you wanted. This is perfect justice, the weight and pressure of its perfect presence.
The scenes continued to unfold, hundreds of them. Big wrongs, little wrongs. Times he made Nathan cry. Times he was selfish. Times he told lies, even the little white ones. Times he talked behind people's backs. And with each scene, the mirrors pushed harder. The pain was unbearable. Something had to give. Unfortunately, it wasn't the mirrors. It was Josh's body. He could actually feel himself being crushed, hear bone and cartilage snapping. He wanted to scream, but that meant having to breathe, and right now, with all the pressure, breathing was barely an option. Then he heard it. He couldn't see where, but there was no mistaking the clear of someone cross-dimensionalizing. When Denise and Nathan arrived, it took a moment to get their bearings. A billion mirrors pointed in a billion different directions can be a little confusing. Still, they were beautiful mirrors, gleaming, dazzling, elegant. Mirrors that captured reflections within reflections within reflections, particularly of Denise in the splendor of her bridal gown, and Nathan in his glowing suit of armor. But what of Joshua?
Josh! Joshua, where are you?
There was no answer. Denise and Nathan exchanged puzzled looks. Aristophanes and Listerque had promised he would be there, but where? Listerque's voice asked from the cross-dimensionalizer in Nathan's hand,
"Do him see you? Nathan, do him see you?"
Nathan brought the cross-dimensionalizer up to his mouth.
We don't see a thing, only mirrors.
Are you sure you gave us the right quadrants? Remember, sometimes your aim isn't so.
Right quadrants. Have do you? Somewhere there is he. You must look care.
Here. What did you say?
I didn't say anything.
Neither me.
Here.
There it was again, so thin and frail that Nathan wasn't entirely sure it was a voice.
Over here.
Now Denise heard it too.
Josh?
Then she spotted him.
Over there!
Nathan followed her finger to two giant mirrors pressing together. Well, they were almost together. It seemed there was a thin something separating them. And that thin something, with its feathers, 6 legs, and 2 heads, looked very much like...
Joshua!
Nathan raced around dozens of mirrors until he reached his brother. Denise was right behind him. Together they tried to pry the giant mirrors apart.
Help me! Help me! Hang on, we'll get you out of there.
They continued pushing, shoving, prying, and pulling, but no matter what they did, the mirrors would not budge.
Going on is what?
The mirrors! They're crushing Josh! We can't...
She gave them a kick, but only managed to stub her toe.
We can't budge them!
That's because no substance has he.
What?
Imager's breath, not inside Josh.
I don't understand!
It was Aristophanes' turn.
Only Imager's breath has enough substance to hold back them mirrors from the crush of pure justice.
Listerque agreed.
Flesh and blood enough not. Imager's breath only enough, real to hold back mirrors.
Nathan thought he understood. The only thing stronger than the power of the mirrors was Imager's breath. With Imager's breath inside Josh, the mirrors could not crush him.
But how do we get the Imager's breath inside him?
The answer was clear and unmistakable.
Rebreathed must too be he.
Nathan nodded. Somehow they'd have to get Josh to be rebreathed just as they had been. But how? He threw a look over to Denise. Unfortunately, she was nowhere to be found.
Denny? Denny!
He turned and shouted into the cross-dimensionalizer.
Denny's disappeared! I can't find her!
Find her must you. Leave her alone, must not you.
Denny! Denny, where are you?
And then he heard it. Soft crying, gentle weeping. It came from several mirrors away.
I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
He raced around the mirrors, searching, until he finally spotted her. She was staring deeply into one of the mirrors, and she was crying.
I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry.
Denny? What's going on?
But Denise didn't hear. She stared at the mirror, totally captivated by what she saw. Nathan turned to see for himself and was dumbstruck. The reflection was of a much younger Denise. The little girl was yelling at her mother, saying awful things that made the poor woman break into tears. And as the older Denise watched the reflected scene, she too was beginning to cry.
I didn't mean it! Mama, I didn't mean it!
Lister Q called through the cross-dimensionalizer.
Going on is what?
It's Denny. She's looking at herself in one of these mirrors. Only it's her when she was a lot younger.
The illusionist.
What?
One of her favorite tricks is it to destroy Denny. She'll try by showing all wrongs ever do, did she?
Once again, Nathan had to rearrange Lister Q's words.
You mean she's trying to hurt Denny by making her look at all the stuff she ever did wrong?
Yes and no. Yes, they are wrongs Denny did, but no, exist no longer they.
What do you mean?
Clean of all wrongs is Denny. Since her rebirth, Imager completely has forgotten them.
Now it's a matter of who she wants to believe, Imager or the illusionist.
I'm not following you.
You two are now clean. Imager sees you as perfection, but you must believe his truth or you'll fall for her deception.
You mean the stuff in the mirrors happened, but they're not true because...
Because Imager had completely cleaned you. He has forgotten all your wrongs, so they no longer exist.
So when the illusionist says they're true...
Lying is she.
Denise cried out, and Nathan turned to the mirror. The scene had changed. It was another argument, only this time between her parents. The two were yelling at each other as little 4-year-old Denise stood in the middle, crying, begging them to stop. But they wouldn't stop. Finally, her father turned angrily to the little girl and started yelling at her. The older Denise watched the scene, breathless through her streaming tears. She whispered,
Daddy, please.
Stop that crying!
He shouted at the younger Denise.
Stop it right now!
The little girl tried to stop, but couldn't.
I said stop it!
She cried even harder. Finally, the man could stand no more. He turned and stormed toward the door. The older Denise shouted,
Daddy! Daddy, don't leave!
But the man obviously did not hear.
Daddy, please! I'm sorry! I'm sorry!
Grabbing his coat, he threw open the door, shouted a final oath, and slammed it shut behind him.
Daddy!
Denise's knees buckled as she dropped to the ground in front of the mirror. She began to sob.
Daddy, I'm sorry! Please, come back! Come back!
Suddenly, the mother in the mirror looked out at the older Denise. Only she was no longer the mother. Nathan knew it. She may have looked like the mother, but the voice was somebody else, somebody he recognized instantly. The illusionist.
You are the one. You are the one who drove him away.
No!
He left us because of you.
Please!
Denise sobbed, covering her ears, trying to shut out the voice.
It's all your fault.
Please!
You are nothing but a mean-spirited, worthless brat, and he knew it.
Mama, please, I didn't mean...
Your whole life has been worthless.
Daddy!
You have brought only pain and misery.
Mama! Daddy!
Worthless.
Daddy!
Denise could no longer speak. All she could do was sob. But the attack still wasn't over.
It would have been better if you had never lived.
Denise could give no answer.
Wouldn't it?
Denise continued to sob.
Wouldn't it?
Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Denise began to nod, as if she was worthless, as if she was a spoiled brat who brought only misery, as if it would have been better if she had never lived. Nathan watched, astonished, unsure what to do. The illusionist had her. It made no difference what the truth really was. It made no difference that Imager had absorbed all of her wrong and had made her perfect. Denise had chosen to believe the illusionist. And by choosing to believe those lies, they became as real to Denise as if they were truth. Suddenly, the illusionist slammed her fist through her own reflection. It shattered into a dozen pieces of mirror that fell around the sobbing Denise. Now the illusionist's reflection surrounded her on every side.
Do yourself a favor. Do us all a favor. Put an end to your wretched little existence.
Denise looked down at the reflections around her, each of them the illusionist.
Go ahead, you pathetic excuse for a person. Pick me up. Pick me up and do us all a favor.
Nathan watched in horror as Denise reached a trembling hand toward the biggest and sharpest piece of mirror.
Do it. Before you cause any more harm. Do us all a favor and do it. Do it!
Finally, slowly, she picked up the broken shard of mirror and took it into both of her hands.
Do it! Do it!
She turned the pointed end toward her stomach, holding it like a sharp dagger.
Do it! Do it! Do it!
She sucked in a final breath. She raised the dagger high over her head and...
No!
Nathan leaped at her. He hit her so hard they both went rolling across the ocean's floor.
Let me go!
Denise screamed as she tried to free her hands.
Let me do it!
It's a lie! It's not you anymore! It's a lie from the illusionist!
But Denise was no match for the new, stronger Nathan. Soon he had both of her arms pinned to the ground.
Let me go! I know what I'm like! Let me go!
It's not you anymore! Remember Imager! Remember what he did!
Let me go!
She continued to struggle.
Forget what you were! Forget what you were and remember who he is!
In a flash of inspiration, Nathan grabbed her canteen of water. He unscrewed the lid and poured the liquid directly onto Denise's head and into her face. She coughed and sputtered until some finally splashed into her eyes. He took her head and forced it around to the nearest mirror and shouted,
"Look at yourself! See who you really are!"
At first she fought and tried to look the other way, but soon her eyes landed upon the reflection, and she saw herself as Imager saw her, the glorious, majestic bride in the shimmering gown of light. She stopped struggling and continued to stare. She was beginning to understand. She was remembering who she really was. Slowly she started to nod, and then at last she turned to Nathan.
Thank you.
She whispered hoarsely.
Thank you.
When he was sure she was all right, Nathan released her. Oh, but he knew it wasn't the end of the battle, for when he looked back to the broken pieces of mirror on the ground, there was no sign of the illusionist. She had obviously returned to her first victim. Nathan spun around and started back to his brother.
Joshua! Joshua!
Chapter 12. The Final Conflict.
Denise and Nathan raced back to Josh. They didn't believe it could be possible, but the mirrors had actually crushed him even flatter than before.
I can't hang on.
Joshua, listen to me. The only way to fight these mirrors is with Imager's breath.
I don't
Imager's breath is more real than the power of these mirrors. With his breath inside you, they can't crush you.
How do I?
He winced in pain as the mirrors closed in another fraction of an inch.
The bloodstone! You got it?
Right here.
Denise pulled it from a fold in her bridal gown.
Hold it out. Let me pour some of the water on it.
What?
Just hold it in your hand and...
You're crazy!
Denny!
You saw what happened the last time we poured water on it. No way am I holding it.
The mirrors moved in another fraction.
Come on, Denny. He can't step into any pool the way he is. We have to pour the liquid bloodstone over him.
Denise turned to Josh. She had never seen anyone in such pain. She looked back to the bloodstone in her hand. It was already starting to glow and heat up, and for good reason. Nathan was already unscrewing the cap to the canteen. As the bloodstone grew hotter, Denise tried not to panic. What would happen? Would it burn her? Melt her right along with it? Who knew? Who knew anything in this place? But she did know one thing. She knew that Josh was her friend, and she knew that he could not stand any more pain. Nathan reached out the canteen, waiting for Denise. She looked at him, then to Josh. Finally, she nodded and held out the bloodstone. Nathan began pouring the water. Its liquid letters and words splashed onto the bloodstone and into her hands. Immediately, the stone began crackling and hissing. Denise winced at the growing heat, but she hung on. She watched in terror as the bloodstone began melting in her hands, but she hung on. Slowly, a small cone of wind sprouted from the red liquid.
What's happening?
Josh cried as he strained for a better look.
It's a bloodstone! It'll make you perfect. And that whirlwind, it's Imager's breath. It'll...
Liars.
Suddenly, Denise saw Bobuck's reflection. He was inside the mirror that was crushing Joshua from the front. Before she could respond, the illusionist called to him from the other mirror, the one crushing him from the back.
There is only justice here, dear heart. Perfect justice. Here you receive exactly what you deserve.
That's not true! The bloodstone will absorb your wrong. It will make you perfect so you can be filled with Imagers.
Most illogical. In a rational universe, one does not receive something for nothing. One must pay for what one has done.
He's wrong!
It would go against all the laws of physics. As a scientist, you know the need for absolute cause and effect. If there is but one exception to this logic, the universe would unravel. There would be no order, no justice.
Josh turned his eyes to Denise. The mirrors pressed tighter.
He's right.
He clenched his eyes against the pain, trying his best to stay conscious.
No! He's done nothing but lie to you from the start. Why do you believe him now?
Because it's logic. Someone must pay for my...
That's just it! Imager is paid. The bloodstone will absorb your wrong. It will take your punishment.
Dear child.
Bobuck turned to Nathan in his kindest voice.
You have such great insight. If you would use it to its fullest potential, there's no telling what you could become. Why, with a proper training, you could be one of the wisest, most sought-after men in your kingdom.
Denise saw what was happening and immediately shouted,
Don't listen to him, Nathan! He's trying to seduce you like in Fey-Ra!
But she was too late. Bobuck obviously remembered his weakness and had gone for it. Nathan was already staring into the mirror, already being drawn into it by the creature's smooth, praising words.
Do not let such a great mind as yours be wasted. Come, boy, come closer to the mirror. Take a deep look at yourself and see all that you could.
Don't listen to him! It's a trick!
But Nathan was listening, and he was looking. Bobuck purred.
That's it. Look nice and deep. Deeper still.
Nathan!
Scenes from Nathan's own life flickered upon Bobuck's mirror. Denise was beside herself. What could she do? She looked at the liquid bloodstone still in her hands. Then suddenly, without hesitation, she shoved it straight toward the mirrors, right at Bobuck's reflection.
Put that away!
Bobuck screamed as he raced to the far end of his mirror and cowered. The cry startled Nathan, seeming to break the spell. He blinked once, twice, then turned back to Denise. Good, he was back. Quickly, she reached up and tried to dump the remainder of the liquid bloodstone over Joshua's heads. But the liquid would not fall. It clung to her palms. She turned her hands completely upside down and shook them. Still nothing. It just hung like glue. It was still liquid, but it would not fall. The illusionist broke into mocking laughter.
What are you doing to it?
Bobuck joined the illusionist as their laughter reverberated back and forth throughout the mirrors.
Ha ha ha! Fool!
The communicator gave a crackle, followed by Aristophanes' voice.
Denise, the decision must be Joshua's, not yours. He cannot be rebreathed unless it's his decision.
Did you hear that?
But the pain was too great. Josh was losing consciousness.
Joshua!
Nathan reached over and shook him. Josh mumbled something, but his eyes had closed. The illusionist shouted to Bobuck.
We have won! Dear and trusted friend, victory is ours!
Yes, pity to have only one destroyed, but one is better than none.
Bobuck shrugged as much as a blue orb can shrug.
Josh, you gotta listen to me. We can't do this for you. It's got to be your decision. Joshua!
Joshua O'Brien, you are the stubbornest person I've ever met!
Suddenly Denise was in his faces, both of them, and shouting at the top of her lungs. Josh stirred slightly, barely opening his eyes. She yelled,
This is killing you! Don't you see that? You're being smashed to smithereens!
It's what I deserve.
The Bloodstone can change that! Imager paid the price!
His eyes started to close.
Don't do this! Don't you go and die on me, Joshua O'Brien!
The boy pried open a single eye.
All you have to do is trust it! I know it doesn't make sense. I know it's not logical, but maybe there's another type of logic here, a deeper logic. If you just...
Suddenly, Denise's eyes welled with moisture. She hated it when that happened, but there was no way to stop it.
Please, don't leave us! Please, I need you!
The tears spilled onto her cheeks.
Who's gonna help me with my math? Who's gonna stop me from beating up all those guys at school?
Stop that! Stop that crying this instant!
Josh, please!
Denise's throat tightened. The tears continued.
I know it doesn't make sense, but you gotta trust the Bloodstone!
Stop her!
It's the only way!
Stop!
And then the most curious thing happened. One of Denise's tears fell from her cheek. A single tear of her love. Love. Something that the Sea of Justice had apparently never experienced. Because as that tear fell onto a small mirror near her feet, the mirror suddenly gave a sharp and violent crack. Everyone jumped in surprise. Then it cracked again. Then again. The illusionist screamed,
"Stop it!"
Then the entire mirror exploded. Dozens of pieces flew in every direction, some landing on other mirrors. Then those mirrors began to crack until they too exploded.
You're destroying justice!
Denise and Nathan watched in amazement as more mirrors cracked and exploded, sending hundreds of pieces into hundreds of other mirrors, which also cracked and exploded. Somehow, without even knowing it, Denise had started a giant chain reaction. Nathan shouted,
Joshua! Joshua, we've got to get out of here! Joshua, can you hear me?
Josh mumbled something.
Do you want us to pour the Bloodstone on you?
Stop it!
Again, Josh mumbled. Denise looked to Nathan in confusion.
Try it! He might be saying yes. Try it!
Denise raised her hand over Joshua's heads to pour the liquid Bloodstone. And this time it worked. This time the liquid fell from her hand and onto one of his heads, and then the other. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Slowly it ran down his faces, dripping onto his shoulders. As it did, Joshua began to grow transparent, just as they had. As the red liquid flowed down his body, all of the darkness, all of the wrong he had ever done was drawn to the surface and into that liquid. And where the Bloodstone flowed, the Whirlwind followed. Instantly, the wind picked up all around him until it completely engulfed him.
Breathe in! You've got to breathe in!
Joshua's first breath was thin and shallow, but Denise saw some of Imager's reality enter him. And with that entrance, the mirrors pressing him were pushed back slightly. He tried again, taking a deeper breath. More of Imager entered, and the mirrors were pushed back further. Bobak shouted over the kingdom as it continued shattering and exploding.
We're undone!
Josh breathed again, then again, deeper and deeper, filling himself more and more with Imager's reality. He could no longer be held prisoner. He continued to expand until suddenly the two mirrors pressing him began to crack. The illusionist screamed from her cracked reflection behind him.
Help me!
Undone!
Help me!
But there was no help for her or her ice blue friend. Joshua took another breath. More cracks. A deeper breath. Even more cracks. Bobak screamed,
We are ruined!
And then with Joshua's deepest breath, the two mirrors exploded in all directions. The dreaded Bobak and illusionist shattered into billions of pieces of mirror, billions of pieces of light. Denise looked on. Apparently evil does not die easily. It took a long moment for their anguished screams to fade from the Sea of Justice. And when they had finally faded, there was no longer a Bobak. There was no longer an illusionist. They were gone. All that remained of them was a sparkling cloud of dust that began to sprinkle down upon the kingdom. And from that downpour of glittering dust, a new and different Joshua stepped forward. No longer was he some pathetic two-headed feathered freak. Now he was a man, a mighty man. And atop his strong shoulders he carried a clay pot filled to the brim with water. But not the water of earth. No, this was the water of liquid words and letters. The mirrors continued shattering and exploding all around them. The sea of justice was being destroyed, all from Denise's single tear, all from her love. Nothing more had to be said. Nathan pulled out the little box and pressed the 4 buttons.
Chapter 13. The Greatest Adventures of All.
The good news was that Nathan was a better shot with a cross-dimensionalizer than Listroque. The bad news was he was still a beginner.
Great. Where'd we land this time?
Denise replied,
"Mm-hmm."
It was supposed to be, I don't know, but it's hard talking when somebody's kneecap is in your mouth. Wherever they were definitely tumbled and crammed together.
Here, just let me... Ow! Move your elbows in my eye.
Oh, sorry.
Denise was the first to get an arm free. Unfortunately, it hit some sort of faucet and suddenly... all 3 of them were soaked with water.
Denny! It's our shower. We've landed in our shower.
Oh, no. Oh, great.
Oh, brother.
The complaint soon gave way to giggles as the 3 finally untangled themselves and dragged their dripping bodies out of the shower, just as Aristophanes, Listroque, and Samson entered the room. Apparently they had heard the commotion from Josh's bedroom and raced down the hall to join them. Although the kids were soaked, there were still plenty of hugs to go around. A part of Denise was glad to be back in her regular clothes, her regular sloppy jeans, her regular sloppy sweatshirt, her regular sloppy everything. But a small part of her was already missing the bridal gown.
I still don't get why we were dressed up like that. Nathan like a knight, me like a bride, and Josh like a
water bearer?
Yeah. What does all that mean?
In time, you will know. Imager's plans will be clear as you continue your journeys and explore his frontiers.
You mean there's more?
Nathan gave a dubious look to Josh and Denise.
Choice is it of yours, but many more adventures there are waiting for you.
You don't mind if we get a little rest first, do you?
The group chuckled. It was true. It hadn't exactly been the easiest of journeys. 2 days and nights without sleep, running and searching for perfect people, struggling through various realms of perfection, not to mention blowing up a kingdom or 2. Denise turned to Aristophanes.
Now that we're rebreathed, I thought the adventures would be over. I mean, from the beginning, wasn't that what Imager wanted? For us to be rebreathed?
Aristophanes and Listroque traded amused looks.
No and yes.
Being rebreathed is by no means the end. It's only now the real adventure begins.
But Bobak and the illusionist? They're both gone.
Right are you. Dust became they.
Nathan let out a sigh of relief. So did Josh. Come to think of it, so did Denise.
But same and different enemies now have you.
Same and different? Like how?
In time, friend my, in time.
Don't worry about them bad guys, 'cause we've all seen your tapestries. If you stay close to Imager, they'll meet the same catastrophes.
The group groaned. Samson commented, and Listroque quickly translated.
Perhaps leave we should now for home, before any worse get his rhymes.
Of course there were the usual, do you have to goes, and can't you stay a few more minutes? But eventually reason won over. Everyone was just too exhausted. Besides, the sky outside was turning pink. Dawn was well on its way. And with dawn would come grown-ups, and with grown-ups would come thousands of questions. Questions they'd be happy to answer in time, but not just yet.
Sammy boy is right. It's time that we go. Listro, punch in them quadrants. Let's get on with the show.
Nathan tossed the cross-dimensionalizer over to Listroque.
a minute! The Bloodstone! Where's the Bloodstone?
In the Sea of Justice, or where used to be the sea.
It didn't get destroyed with the mirrors?
A part of Imager it is. Impossible to destroy, is it?
But without the Bloodstone, how will we signal you for another visit?
Aristophanes grinned.
We'll be here and around. We won't be long parted, 'cause like we've already stated, your adventures just started.
Josh coughed slightly and cleared his voice. The group turned to him.
Listen, guys, I just want to say, thanks.
He glanced to the ground, a little embarrassed. Each of the group nodded, seeming to understand.
I tell you, I really learned my lesson. No way am I going to go around always trying to be the best and Mr. Super Popular.
Yeah, right.
He gave her a look and then broke into a grin.
Well, at least not all the time.
We've all got stuff to work on.
And with Imager's breath inside you, happen will changes.
You sure about that?
Have the power now, do you, if want to you.
It was Josh's turn to nod. He seemed to understand. Finally, Aristophanes signaled Listerque to enter the quadrants. More hugs were given and goodbyes exchanged until the furry bear-like creature cleared his throat and left them with one final poem.
We best be a-movin'. It's really time that we go. Our beds, they're a-callin'. So bye-bye. See you later. Tally!
And, just like that, the Faeronians were gone. Joshua, Nathan, and Denise stood looking at one another. It was hard to believe that it was over, that they could actually get some rest, that finally things would return to normal. Well, okay, so 2 out of 3 isn't bad. They were right about it being over, and they were right about getting some rest. But as far as things returning to normal, well, let's just say Aristophanes was right when he promised that they were now ready for the real adventures to begin.